We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations of Sand. Darren Blackwood slid his key into the front door of his colonial-style home in Oak Ridge Heights, the neighborhood where success was measured by square footage and German automobiles. The house had been his pride once, a trophy of 15 years climbing the corporate ladder at Meridian Technologies. Now it fell hollow, a beautifully decorated shell housing a marriage that had grown as cold as the marble countertops his wife Valerie had insisted upon during their last renovation. "Val," he called out, his voice echoing through the two-story foyer. No answer as expected. Darren loosened his tie and made his way to the kitchen where a handwritten note sat on the island. "Had to leave suddenly. Mom's condition has worsened. Staying with her for a few weeks. We'll call when I can. V." He sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. Valerie's mother, Ruth, had been battling what his wife vaguely described as a complicated illness for months now. The details were always fuzzy whenever he asked. These sudden trips had become more frequent over the past year, coinciding with the increasing distance between them. At 43, Darren had built his life meticulously. The son of a steel mill worker from Pittsburgh, he put himself through college, earned his MBA, and fought his way into the competitive tech sector with nothing but raw intelligence and stubborn determination. Being the director of operations at Meridian had been the culmination of years of sacrifice. Missed weekends, canceled vacations, and countless 18-hour days. He opened the refrigerator, grabbed a beer, and wandered to his home office. A family photo on the wall caught his eye, him and Valerie on their 10th anniversary trip to Santorini. Her auburn hair blowing in the Mediterranean breeze, both of them smiling. It seemed like a lifetime ago. Darren and Valerie had met in their late 20s when he was still a project manager and she was a marketing executive for a rival firm. Their courtship had been a whirlwind, intense, passionate, ambitious. Two driven professionals who understood each other's hunger for success. They'd married after 8 months, combining their ambitions and resources into what Valerie had called their power merger. Now, 13 years later, the merger was showing serious signs of dissolution. Darren settled into his leather chair and opened his laptop. Work would distract him from the growing emptiness of his personal life. He was finalizing the details of Project Phoenix, Meridian's most ambitious product launch to date. The project had been his creation, a revolutionary cybersecurity platform that would position Meridian at the forefront of the industry. If successful, it would mean a significant promotion, perhaps even a seat on the executive board. His immediate boss, Wade Preston, the senior VP of product development, had initially opposed the project. But Darren had gone over his head directly to CEO Lenora Washington, who had immediately recognized its potential. Wade's resistance had turned to grudging cooperation once the CEO gave her blessing, but the tension between them had only increased in recent months. Wade Preston came from old money and an Ivy League pedigree, everything Darren wasn't. At 51, Wade had the confidence of someone who'd never truly had a struggle, who believed himself entitled to success rather than having to earn it. His slick back hair was always perfectly styled, his custom suits impeccable, his Connecticut accent a constant reminder of their different backgrounds. As Darren reviewed the project timeline, a notification popped up on his screen. An email from Preston moving their 9 a.m. meeting to 7:30 a.m. tomorrow. Another power play, Darren muttered. Wade knew Darren coached his nephew's baseball team on Tuesday evenings and always arrived at work at 8:15 on Wednesdays. His phone buzzed with a text from Miles Ramirez, his best friend since college and now Meridian's chief information security officer. "Drinks tomorrow? Need to talk." "Important." Darren texted back. "Preston moved our meeting to 7:30. How about lunch instead?" Miles's response was quick, perfect, usual place. 1 p.m. Darren worked until midnight, finally crawling into the empty king-sized bed. He reached for his phone to call Valerie, then stopped. It was after midnight, and if her mother was ill, he didn't want to disturb them. He'd try in the morning. Morning came with no word from his wife. His calls went straight to voicemail. Hey Val, just checking in. Hope your mom's doing okay. Let me know if you need anything. The early meeting with Preston was characteristically frustrating. Wade nitpicked minor details of the Phoenix project, questioning decisions that had been approved months ago. I'm concerned about the timeline, Blackwood, Wade said, leaning back in his chair with casual arrogance. The board's not convinced we can deliver by Q3. The team is on track, and we've built in contingencies, Darren replied, keeping his voice level. As you can see from the progress reports can be manipulated, Wade interrupted. I need to see real progress. Darren bit back his irritation. You're welcome to attend any of our daily stand-ups. The team is solid. Wade waved his hand dismissively. Just make sure it doesn't fail. The board won't forget who pushed for this project if it falls apart. By the time Darren met Miles for lunch at Lorenzo's, an Italian bistro several blocks from the Meridian building, his patience was wearing thin. Miles was already at their usual corner table, nursing a sparkling water. At 42, Miles had the athletic build of someone who still played competitive basketball on weekends. His dark eyes narrowed when he saw Darren. You look like hell, Miles said as Darren slid into the booth. Preston's on the warpath again, Darren replied, ordering an iced tea from the passing waiter. What's so important? Miles glanced around before leaning forward. Look, man, I debated whether to tell you this, but as your friend, I can't keep it to myself. Darren felt his stomach tighten. What is it? You know how IT does random security sweeps of executive communications? Just routine checks for suspicious activity. Yeah, compliance stuff. What about it? Miles's expression grew grave. I found something. Wade's been communicating with someone at Archer Systems. Archer Systems was Meridian's biggest competitor. Darren frowned. That's not necessarily unusual. People have industry contacts. These weren't professional contacts, Darren. He's been sharing internal documents, including some related to Phoenix. Darren felt the blood drain from his face. You're sure? Miles nodded. Positive. And there's more. He's been trying to undermine you with the board, suggesting the project's failures are due to your leadership, not the challenges we anticipated. That snake, Darren muttered. But why are you risking telling me this? If anyone found out. Because there's something else, Miles interrupted. Something personal. He hesitated. When was the last time you heard from Valerie? The abrupt change of subject caught Darren off guard. She's at her mother's. Been there for a few days. What? Miles's expression shifted from concern to discomfort. Darren, Ruth Conway died 3 years ago. Valerie's mother is dead. The world seemed to tilt beneath Darren. What? No, that's not possible. Val's been visiting her, taking care of her. I saw Ruth's obituary when I was cross-checking some employee information. Heart failure, 3 years ago in May. There's no mistake. Darren's mind raced, trying to make sense of this information. If Valerie wasn't with her mother, where had she been going all these times? Who had she been with? There's one more thing, Miles said quietly, sliding his phone across the table. On the screen was a photograph of Wade Preston's beach house in the Hamptons, a property frequently featured in company social events. In the driveway was Valerie's white Mercedes convertible. This was taken yesterday, Miles said, by my cousin who lives near there. I asked him to drive by after I put these pieces together. Darren stared at the image, a strange calm settling over him as the pieces fell into place. The late-night texts, the sudden trips, Wade's increasing hostility. The beautiful beach house Darren had visited for company retreats, where he'd once complimented the gourmet kitchen that Wade boasted had been designed by a famous chef. The kitchen where his wife was now probably preparing meals for his enemy. I'm sorry, man, Miles said, reclaiming his phone. I thought you should know. Darren nodded slowly, his mind already shifting from shock to calculation. You were right to tell me. And Miles? Thank you. The rest of lunch passed in a blur as Darren processed the betrayal. By the time he returned to his office, the initial shock had hardened into cold resolve. He would not react impulsively. He would not confront them immediately. First, he needed more information. That evening, he sat in his home office and began to dig. He accessed their shared cloud storage, finding deleted travel receipts and hotel reservations dating back 18 months. He reviewed their joint credit card statements, discovering patterns of purchases when Valerie was supposedly with her mother. Expensive restaurants in the Hamptons, boutique shops near Wade's beach house. Most damning of all, he found a folder of photos Valerie had failed to completely delete. Intimate pictures of her and Wade together on his yacht, in his beach house, in the bed Darren had slept in during company retreats. His wife and his boss hadn't just betrayed him. They'd been flaunting their affair in the very spaces Darren had occupied, turning his career and marriage into an elaborate joke at his expense. As dawn broke, Darren stood in the shower, letting the scalding water wash over him. His path was clear now. This wasn't just about infidelity or professional rivalry. This was about dignity, about justice, about reclaiming what had been taken from him through deceit. Preston and Valerie believed they could discard him, both personally and professionally. They thought he was weak, pathetic, easily manipulated. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Chapter 2: Surveillance and Strategy. For the next week, Darren maintained a facade of normalcy. He attended meetings, refined Project Phoenix details, and even exchanged pleasant text messages with Valerie about her mother's improving condition, all while orchestrating the first phase of his response to their betrayal: comprehensive surveillance. Using his technical background and with subtle assistance from Miles, Darren deployed a sophisticated monitoring system. He activated location tracking on Valerie's devices through their shared family account. He recovered deleted text messages using backup software. He installed small, discreet cameras at their home, capturing Valerie's brief visits to collect clothes or mail when she thought he was at work. Most valuable was the access Miles had provided to Meridian's internal communications. Though technically crossing an ethical line, Miles had reasoned that Wade's corporate espionage and attempts to sabotage Darren's project justified the intrusion. "I'm not giving you access to everything," Miles had explained. "Just enough to protect yourself." The information Darren gathered painted a comprehensive picture of the conspiracy against him. It wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated plan to eliminate him from both his marriage and his career. Wade and Valerie had been involved for nearly 2 years. What had begun as flirtation at company events had evolved into a full-blown relationship with a shared future planned, one that required removing Darren from the equation. Their scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Wade would gradually undermine Darren's position at Meridian, building a case for his removal once Project Phoenix launched. Meanwhile, Valerie would emotionally distance herself, eventually filing for divorce once Darren's professional standing was compromised. Their prenuptial agreement had a clause significantly reducing Valerie's settlement if she was unfaithful, but without proof, it would be his word against hers. Most disturbing were the casual text exchanges between them discussing their plans. "Val, does he suspect anything?" "Wade Blackwood? Not a chance. Too focused on his precious project." Board meeting went perfectly. Seeds of doubt officially planted. "Val, what about Lenora? She's always favored him." "Wade, working on her." Subtly suggesting his work is derivative of Archer's platform. She's starting to listen. "Val, perfect. 2 more months until the launch fails. Then we're free. Can't wait to renovate that kitchen at the beach house. Your bachelor appliances are tragic." Their confidence in his ignorance fueled Darren's determination. They believed him to be oblivious, focusing on his project while they dismantled his life around him. They had no idea he was now watching their every move, cataloging every betrayal, constructing his counterstrike. During this surveillance phase, Darren also discovered an unexpected ally in Lenora Washington's executive assistant, Bridget Navarro. Bridget had worked at Meridian for over 20 years, starting as a receptionist and rising to become the CEO's right hand. At 58, she was a formidable presence with her immaculate silver bob and penetrating gaze. Nothing happened at Meridian without Bridget knowing about it. Darren had always maintained a respectful, friendly relationship with her, unlike Wade, who treated her with the dismissive condescension he reserved for anyone he deemed beneath him. It was this difference in treatment that had made Bridget notice the campaign against Darren. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, appearing at his office door one afternoon. "Do you have a moment?" Darren welcomed her in, closing the door behind her. I'll be direct, Bridget said, sitting primly on the edge of the visitor's chair. Mr. Preston has been speaking with Ms. Washington about Project Phoenix. Not favorably. Darren nodded. I've suspected as much. What you may not know is that he's been scheduling these conversations immediately before your update meetings, deliberately seeding doubts that you then unknowingly walk into. I appreciate the information, Bridget. May I ask why you're telling me? Bridget's expression hardened. I've been at Meridian since before Mr. Preston arrived with his Harvard MBA and his father's connections. I've seen how he operates, how he eliminates threats. She straightened her already perfect posture. My late husband worked in steel. Started on the floor like your father, worked his way up to foreman through merit, not connections. I respect people who earn their position. Darren studied her. You know a lot about me. It's my job to know things, Mr. Blackwood. And I know Mr. Preston has been accessing confidential personnel files. You're specifically looking for weaknesses. This was new information. Thank you for telling me. Bridget stood to leave, then hesitated. One more thing. Your wife called the office last week, looking for Mr. Preston. When I said he was at his beach residence, she seemed familiar with the location. Mentioned something about having left her earrings in the usual drawer. I found that curious. Darren maintained his composure, though internally he added this to his growing evidence. Very curious indeed. Bridget nodded once. I believe in this company, Mr. Blackwood. I believe in merit and integrity. Whatever happens next, remember you have allies who share those values. After she left, Darren added Bridget to his mental chessboard, a potential queen in the game he was constructing. Her inside information would be valuable, and her loyalty to the company's true interests aligned with his objectives. By the end of the second week of surveillance, Darren had compiled comprehensive documentation of both the affair and the professional sabotage. He now understood the full scope of their plan and its weaknesses. Wade had been feeding selective information to Archer Systems, positioning himself for a potential executive role there if his play for greater power at Meridian failed. He'd been carefully manipulating the board's perception of Project Phoenix, ensuring he could take credit for its successes while blaming Darren for any failures. Meanwhile, Valerie had been systematically liquidating some of their joint investments, creating a financial cushion for herself while weakening Darren's position. She'd even begun consulting with a divorce attorney, one who specialized in circumventing prenuptial agreements. Armed with this knowledge, Darren began formulating his counter-strategy. This wouldn't be a simple confrontation or an emotional outburst. It would be a precisely orchestrated campaign to reclaim what was his and ensure those who had betrayed him faced appropriate consequences. The plan would require patience, careful timing, and strategic risk. It would unfold in phases, each designed to isolate, expose, and ultimately defeat Wade and Valerie at their own game. As Darren refined his approach, he realized this wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about correcting an imbalance, about ensuring that merit and integrity prevailed over deceit and entitlement. Wade and Valerie had underestimated him because of his humble origins. They'd mistaken his work ethic for weakness, his focus for obliviousness. They were about to discover the formidable adversary they had created through their betrayal. The endgame would require precision. Darren would need to neutralize Wade professionally while simultaneously addressing Valerie's betrayal. The two objectives were intertwined but required different tactics. For Wade, the approach would need to be corporate and calculated, leveraging his unethical behavior against him while protecting Project Phoenix and Darren's position at Meridian. For Valerie, a more personal reckoning was required, one that addressed both the emotional and financial dimensions of her betrayal. As Darren laid out the phases of his plan, a text arrived from Valerie. Mom's feeling much better. Planning to come home this weekend. Miss you. Darren smiled coldly at the phone. Perfect timing, he murmured, typing his response. Great news. I miss you too. Can't wait to see you. The first confrontation was about to begin. Chapter 3. The Confrontation. Thursday evening, Darren sat in his parked car half a mile from Wade Preston's Hampton Beach house, the light fading as dusk settled over the exclusive neighborhood. Through binoculars, he observed Valerie's white Mercedes in the driveway, alongside Wade's Aston Martin. The surveillance photos from Miles's cousin had been accurate. He told Valerie he had a late meeting and wouldn't be home until after midnight. The lie had come easily as her fabrications about her dying mother. At 8:42 p.m., Darren drove slowly past the property, confirming the silhouettes of two people moving about in the kitchen. They were preparing dinner, comfortable in their shared domesticity. He parked down the street and waited until 10:15 p.m., when the lights in the main living area dimmed. Through the large windows facing the ocean, he could see the flickering glow of what was likely the fireplace. Darren approached the house on foot, using the access code he'd seen Wade input during a company retreat the previous year. The security system disarmed with a soft beep. He entered silently through the side door that led to the gourmet kitchen. The house was quiet except for soft music coming from the living room. Jazz, Wade's preferred background for what he considered sophisticated evenings. Darren could hear low conversation and occasional laughter. He moved through the kitchen, noticing the remnants of their dinner. 2 empty wine glasses, plates with traces of what appeared to be seafood risotto, Valerie's favorite dish that she claimed Wade prepared better than any restaurant chef. Darren paused at the kitchen entrance, taking a moment to control his breathing. The evidence before him confirmed everything he discovered during his investigation, yet seeing the physical proof of their shared intimacy. Her cardigan draped over a kitchen chair, his tie thrown casually across the counter, made the betrayal viscerally real in a way digital surveillance hadn't. He moved silently down the hallway toward the living room, stopping just short of the entrance. From his position, he could see them without being immediately visible. Wade sitting on the plush sectional sofa, Valerie curled against him, her head on his shoulder as they shared a bottle of expensive red wine. "Just 2 more weeks," Wade was saying, his hand stroking Valerie's auburn hair. "The Phoenix launch will fail spectacularly, and your husband's career at Meridian will be finished." Valerie laughed softly, "And the divorce papers will be ready to serve the following day. The timing couldn't be more perfect. Have you decided how you'll play it?" Wade asked, refilling their glasses. The grieving wife supporting her failed husband, or the outraged spouse who can't tolerate his professional incompetence? "I'm thinking something in between," Valerie mused. Supportive but concerned, suggesting that perhaps a fresh start somewhere else, far from Meridian, will be best for both of us. That way, when I file for divorce a few months later, it won't seem connected to his professional failure. Wade chuckled. "Brilliant as always. That's why we make such a perfect team." "Speaking of teams," Valerie said, shifting to face him, "have you told Lenora about the executive position at Archer yet? Or are you still playing both sides?" Wade took a long sip of wine, keeping my options open. If I can leverage Phoenix's failure into Preston's early retirement, I'll take his seat at Meridian. If not, Archer's offer is extremely generous. "And where do I fit in these plans?" Valerie asked, a note of insecurity in her voice that Darren had rarely heard during their marriage. Wade kissed her forehead. "By my side, of course. Once you're free of Darren and I've secured either position, we move forward together. I've already spoken with a realtor about properties in Greenwich." Valerie smiled, clearly pleased. "And Darren Blackwood will be yesterday's news. A footnote in the company history. The working-class boy who reached beyond his capabilities and failed. No one will remember him a year from now." Darren had heard enough. He stepped into the doorway, applauding slowly. "Fascinating strategic planning session. Don't let me interrupt." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Valerie jerked upright, spilling wine across her blouse. Wade's face drained of color as he scrambled to stand. "Darren," Valerie gasped, her shock giving way to a rapid calculation visible in her eyes. "This isn't what looks like," Darren finished, his voice unnervingly calm. "I think it's exactly what it looks like. My wife and my boss, planning the systematic destruction of my career and marriage while enjoying a rather mediocre Cabernet." Wade recovered quickly, his aristocratic features hardening into the condescending mask he wore at the office. "Blackwood, breaking and entering is a criminal offense. I suggest you leave immediately before I call the authorities." Darren smiled coldly. "By all means, call them. I'm sure they'd be interested in the corporate espionage evidence I've compiled. Sharing confidential Meridian information with Archer Systems is far more serious than my using a security code you carelessly displayed during the last company retreat. Wade's confidence faltered visibly. What are you talking about? Oh, I have copies of everything, Wade. Every email, text, file transfer. Did you really think our IT security team wouldn't flag unusual access patterns? Especially to Phoenix documentation? Valerie stood, straightening her clothes, her initial shock transforming into the poised confidence that had first attracted Darren years ago. Darren, let's discuss this rationally. Like adults. Yes, Wade and I have developed feelings for each other. These things happen in marriages. But these accusations of corporate espionage are absurd and frankly beneath you. Darren turned his attention to his wife, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. How's your mother, Val? Still recovering from her illness? Remarkable progress for a woman who died 3 years ago. Valerie paled but recovered quickly. I can explain that. It's complicated. No, it's actually quite simple, Darren interrupted. You've been lying. About everything. For years. He turned back to Wade. And you've been plotting to destroy my career while sleeping with my wife. Also simple. Wade moved toward the side table where his phone lay. This conversation is over. I want you out of my house. I'm leaving, Darren said calmly. But first, let me share what happens next. He pulled out his own phone, displaying a screen with active audio recording. This entire conversation has been recorded, including your admissions about Phoenix sabotage and corporate espionage. I have similar recordings from the past week, along with evidence of unauthorized file access and communications with Archer Systems. Wade lunged for the phone, but Darren sidestepped him easily. Copies are already secured elsewhere. Attacking me won't change that. Valerie approached cautiously. Darren, be reasonable. What do you want? Money? A quiet divorce? Name your terms. Darren looked at her with genuine curiosity. Do you really know me so little after 13 years of marriage? This isn't a negotiation, Valerie. This is notification. You both thought I was pathetic, easily manipulated, too focused on work to notice your betrayal. He smiled, a gesture devoid of warmth. You were wrong. He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. One more thing. I wouldn't bother coming to the office tomorrow, Wade. Or Monday. In fact, you might want to contact your lawyer. You're going to need representation. As he walked out, Valerie called after him, her voice losing its composed edge. You're making a mistake, Darren. This won't end well for you. Darren turned back one last time. It already hasn't ended well for me, Val. The difference is, it's about to get much worse for both of you. The drive home was strangely peaceful. The confrontation had gone exactly as planned. He'd confirmed their plot, documented their admissions, and established the psychological advantage. They now knew he was aware of their betrayal, but they had no idea of the full extent of his counteroffensive. When he arrived home, he poured himself a rare glass of scotch and called Miles. It's done, he said when his friend answered. Phase 1 complete. How did they react? Miles asked, exactly as expected. Shock, then denial, then threats. They're still underestimating me. What's next? Darren took a sip of scotch, savoring the burn. Tomorrow, we accelerate. Are you sure you want to be involved in this? There's still time to step back. Wade's behavior threatens the company's security. My direct responsibility, Miles replied firmly. And you're my friend. I'm in. Then be ready. Tomorrow will be eventful. After ending the call, Darren opened his laptop and sent a series of encrypted files to specific recipients, evidence packages carefully tailored to each person's role in what would follow. To Bridget Navarro, documentation of Wade's sabotage attempts. To Lenora Washington, evidence of the corporate espionage. To the company's legal counsel, records of Wade's communications with Archer Systems. Finally, he sent one last text to Valerie. I'll be clearing your things from the house this weekend. Don't bother coming home. Her response came almost immediately. You have no right. We need to talk about this like adults. Darren didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The time for talking had long passed. Now was time for action. The next morning, Darren arrived at Meridian at precisely 7 a.m., well before most employees. As expected, Bridget Navarro was already at her desk outside Lenora Washington's office. "Mr. Blackwood," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "Ms. Washington is expecting you at 7:30. "Thank you, Bridget," he replied, noting the subtle indication that she had received his files and had already arranged the critical meeting. At 7:25, as Darren waited in the small conference room adjacent to the CEO's office, his phone buzzed with multiple notifications. Wade Preston was trying to reach him. 3 missed calls and a series of increasingly urgent texts. "We need to talk before you do anything rash. This is a misunderstanding that can be resolved. Don't throw away your career over marital problems." Darren silenced his phone as Lenora Washington entered the room, followed by Bridget and Stanley Werner, Meridian's chief legal officer. Lenora's expression was grave, her normally warm demeanor replaced by the calculating focus that had made her one of the most successful CEOs in the industry. "Darren," she said, taking a seat at the head of the table, "I've reviewed the materials you sent. Stanley has been with me since 5 a.m. going through everything. Before we proceed, I need to hear directly from you what's happening." For the next 30 minutes, Darren presented the evidence of Wade's corporate espionage and his systematic attempts to undermine Project Phoenix. He was clinical, focusing solely on the professional betrayal, making no mention of the personal dimension involving Valerie. When he finished, Stanley Werner spoke for the first time. "The evidence is compelling and deeply troubling. If even half of what you've presented is accurate, we're looking at significant legal exposure and potential criminal liability from Mr. Preston." Lenora studied Darren intently. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" "I needed to be certain," Darren replied. "Wade is well-connected and highly regarded. I couldn't make these accusations without irrefutable evidence." "And the personal aspect?" Lenora asked pointedly. "Bridget mentioned there may be complications involving your wife." Darren maintained his professional composure. "My marriage is a separate matter that I'm addressing privately. It has no bearing on the corporate security issues at hand." Lenora nodded, apparently satisfied with his compartmentalization. "We need to move quickly. Stanley, initiate the security protocols for suspected corporate espionage. Bridget, cancel all of Wade's access credentials and schedule an emergency board meeting for this afternoon." She turned back to Darren. "As for Project Phoenix, can you guarantee its integrity hasn't been compromised?" "With Miles's help, we've been conducting a comprehensive security audit for the past week. The core architecture remains secure, though some peripheral documentation may have been exposed. We can adjust our launch strategy accordingly." "Good," Lenora said decisively. "I want you to take direct control of all aspects of Phoenix, effective immediately. Wade's team now reports to you." She checked her watch. "He usually arrives around 8:30. We'll have security meet him at reception." As they concluded the meeting, Lenora held Darren back. "One more thing. I don't know the details of what's happening in your personal life, and I don't need to. But if you need time or support, say the word." "Thank you. But I'm fine," Darren assured her. "Work is the best distraction right now." By 8:45 a.m., Darren was in his office when the commotion began. Through his glass walls, he could see security escorting a visibly agitated Wade Preston toward the elevators. Wade spotted him and detoured sharply, breaking away from the security team to burst through Darren's door. "You snake!" Wade shouted, his perfectly maintained facade cracking completely. "You self-righteous, working-class snake. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" "Well, my family knows." Darren remained seated, unnervingly calm. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Wade. A privileged, entitled fraud who thought his connections would protect him from the consequences of his actions." Security caught up, grabbing Wade's arms. "Mr. Preston, you need to come with us now. This isn't over, Blackwood." Wade spat as they dragged him backward. "You've made an enemy you can't afford. And as for Valerie, she never loved you. She was laughing at you for years. We both were." After Wade was removed, Miles appeared in the doorway. "Well, that was dramatic." "As expected," Darren replied, straightening papers on his desk. "Is everything ready for Phase 2? Miles nodded. "The board has received the preliminary security breach report. Legal is preparing the formal complaint against both Preston and Archer Systems. And I've secured all the Project Phoenix materials as you requested. Perfect. And the other matter? The locksmith finished at your house an hour ago. New security system is active. I have people watching the property in case she tries to show up. Darren nodded appreciatively. Thank you, Miles. I couldn't do this without you. Yes, you could, Miles said with a small smile. You just do it less efficiently. What about tonight's confrontation with Valerie? That's proceeding as planned, Darren confirmed. She doesn't know about Wade's removal yet. That gives me the advantage. As Miles left, Darren turned to the window, looking out at the city skyline. Phase 1, exposure, was complete. Wade Preston's career at Meridian was effectively over. The board would have no choice but to terminate him once they reviewed the evidence. And potential criminal charges for corporate espionage would ensure he'd find no safe harbor at Archer Systems or any other reputable company. Now, it was time to address the personal betrayal, the more painful but equally necessary confrontation with Valerie. She had texted repeatedly throughout the morning, her messages evolving from defensive to conciliatory. We need to talk. This isn't what you think. 13 years of marriage deserves a conversation, not whatever you're planning. Please, Darren, let's meet. I can explain everything. Her latest message had taken a different tone. Wade isn't answering his phone. What have you done? Darren hadn't responded to any of them. Words were Valerie's weapon of choice. She manipulated through conversation, through emotional appeals designed to create doubt and vulnerability. He wouldn't give her that opportunity. Instead, he had arranged for her to discover the consequences of her betrayal in real time, just as he had discovered the truth of their deception. At 5:30 p.m., Darren left the office after confirming the emergency board meeting had concluded with the expected result. Wade Preston had been terminated effective immediately, with legal proceedings pending. The board had unanimously approved Darren's promotion to acting Senior VP of Product Development, with oversight of all projects including Phoenix. As he drove home, he received one final text from Valerie. Coming to the house tonight. We need to talk. This has gone too far. Darren allowed himself a small, grim smile. She had no idea how much further it would go. Chapter 4, Counter-Moves. Valerie Blackwood's white Mercedes pulled into the driveway of the colonial home at precisely 7:42 p.m. From his position in the darkened home office, Darren watched through the blinds as she sat in the car for several minutes, apparently composing herself or perhaps rehearsing what she would say. Finally, she emerged, straightening her designer blazer, her armor for difficult conversations. Darren remained still as she approached the front door. He heard her key in the lock, followed by confusion when it didn't turn. Then came the doorbell, 3 sharp rings in quick succession. When there was no response, she began calling his phone. Darren let it ring through to voicemail while continuing to observe her through the window. Her frustration was evident in her increasingly agitated movements as she paced the front porch. Finally, she resorted to pounding on the door. Darren, I know you're in there. Open the door right now. Only then did Darren move, calmly walking through the darkened house to the front door. He opened it, but remained blocking the entrance. You changed the locks, Valerie said accusingly, attempting to push past him into the house. Darren didn't budge. This is still my home, she insisted, her voice rising. You can't lock me out of my own house. Actually, I can, Darren replied evenly. The house is in my name. Always has been. You insisted on keeping your financial assets separate, remember? For independence? Valerie's expression shifted, attempting to find a different angle. Look, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But this, changing locks, whatever you did to Wade today, it's an overreaction. We need to talk this through calmly. There's nothing to discuss, Darren said. Your belongings are packed in the garage. I'll open it before I leave. Take what's yours and go. Leave? Where are you going? That's no longer your concern. Valerie's calculated composure began to crack. You can't do this. We're still married. I have rights. Rights? Darren interrupted, his calm finally giving way to controlled anger. Like the right to lie about your mother's death for 3 years? The right to conspire with my boss to destroy my career? Those rights. It wasn't like that, Valerie insisted. Things between us have been bad for years, Darren. You were always working, always focused on your precious projects. Wade and it just happened. Affairs just happen, Val. Systematic deception and professional sabotage require planning, effort, commitment. Darren's voice hardened. You used my dead mother-in-law as a cover story for 2 years. You discussed destroying my career over dinner. Don't insult my intelligence by claiming it just happened. Valerie switched tactics, her expression softening into the vulnerable look she had perfected during their marriage whenever she wanted something. I made a terrible mistake. I know that. But 13 years together has to count for something. We could try counseling, a fresh start. Stop, Darren said sharply. Just stop. There's no scenario where we reconcile. Not after what I heard last night. The working-class boy who reached beyond his capabilities and failed. Those were your words about me, Val. Yours and Wade's. Her eyes widened in genuine surprise. You were recording us? I recorded everything. Every conversation between you and Wade for the past 10 days. Meeting where he undermined my project. Admission of your planned divorce strategy. A new calculation visibly formed behind Valerie's eyes. Those recordings won't hold up legally. Not without consent. And they certainly won't override the equitable distribution laws for marital assets. When we divorce, Darren cut in, you'll receive exactly what the prenuptial agreement stipulates in cases of infidelity, which, as you'll recall, is significantly less than you're anticipating. You can't prove infidelity without those illegal recordings, Valerie countered confidently. Darren smiled coldly. I don't need the recordings. I have the text messages you failed to permanently delete, the hotel receipts, the photos from Wade's yacht, and most importantly, the sworn statement Wade signed this afternoon as part of his separation agreement with Meridian, detailing your relationship in exchange for reduced legal penalties. This final revelation landed like a physical blow. Valerie staggered slightly. Wade would never. He promised we'd face this together. Wade Preston comes from old money and Ivy League connections, Darren said, echoing her earlier words. Men like that protect themselves first. Always. He threw you under the bus within an hour of being escorted from the building. The calculation in Valerie's eyes gave way to genuine fear as she processed the implications. Then, just as quickly, it hardened into something else, rage. You think you've won? She hissed. This is just beginning. You have no idea what I'm capable of. What we're capable of together. Wade may have stumbled today, but his family has connections you can't imagine. Board members, investors, politicians. They'll crush you. They can try, Darren replied, unmoved. But unlike you and Wade, I've never underestimated my opponents. I've anticipated every move you might make next, every possible counterstrike. While you were planning my destruction, I was ensuring yours. He stepped back, beginning to close the door. Your things are in the garage. Take them and leave. My lawyer will contact you regarding divorce proceedings. As the door closed, Valerie's composure shattered completely. This isn't over, Darren, she shouted through the door. You'll regret this. I swear you'll regret this. Inside, Darren leaned against the door, listening as her shouting eventually gave way to the sounds of the garage door opening, boxes being moved, and finally, her car starting and driving away. Only then did he allow himself to feel the full weight of the confrontation. Despite his controlled exterior, seeing Valerie, the woman he had loved and built a life with for 13 years, transformed from his wife into a vicious adversary had been deeply painful. The mask had fallen completely, revealing the calculating, ruthless person who had been hiding in plain sight throughout their marriage. He poured himself a scotch and sat in the darkness of his living room, allowing himself exactly 30 minutes to process the loss. Not of the woman who had just left. She had never truly existed, but of the life he had believed they were building together. The future he had envisioned. The trust he had given completely. When the 30 minutes ended, he finished his drink, set down the glass, and returned to his office. There was no time for extended mourning. Valerie's threats weren't empty. She and Wade would retaliate. He needed to be prepared. The following days brought exactly the counterattacks Darren had anticipated. Wade's family connections were indeed substantial, and they were deployed against both Darren and Meridian Technologies. The first salvo came from Leonard Preston, Wade's father, and a significant investor in several companies that did business with Meridian. Contracts were suddenly under review. Partnership discussions were postponed indefinitely. The message was clear: supporting Darren Blackwood would come at a cost. Meanwhile, Valerie had initiated her own offensive. Despite Darren's evidence of her infidelity, she filed for divorce, claiming emotional abandonment and financial manipulation. She hired Camden Thornhill, a notorious divorce attorney known for scorched earth tactics and media manipulation. Within days, carefully crafted leaks appeared in industry publications suggesting Darren had manufactured evidence against Wade out of professional jealousy and to distract from his failing marriage. Most concerning was the coordinated attack on Project Phoenix itself. Technical specifications that Wade had leaked to Archer Systems suddenly appeared in their product roadmap, with accelerated development timelines that would beat Meridian to market. At the same time, key members of the Phoenix development team received lucrative job offers from Archer and other competitors, a clear attempt to poach talent and further undermine the project. Darren had expected all of this. What he hadn't fully anticipated was the personal toll of fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously. Sleep became a luxury. Meals were forgotten. His focus narrowed to a singular purpose: survival and vindication. Miles found him in his office late one evening, surrounded by documents and multiple computer screens displaying project timelines, legal briefs, and financial projections. "When was the last time you slept?" Miles asked, setting down a container of food on the desk. Darren glanced up distractedly. "I got a few hours last night." "Lying doesn't suit you," Miles replied, pushing the food closer. "Eat this while we talk." As Darren reluctantly began eating, Miles updated him on the latest developments. Good news first. The board is holding firm despite pressure from the Preston family. Lenora called in some favors and stabilized the key partnerships Leonard was trying to disrupt. And the bad news? Archer's accelerating their development. They're claiming a launch date 3 weeks before a scheduled release for Phoenix. And Valerie's attorney filed additional motions today, something about hidden assets and business interests. Darren nodded, having expected both developments. Archer's rushing will lead to security vulnerabilities. We need to document them when they launch. It'll prove they stole an incomplete version of our specifications. He pushed aside the divorce papers. As for Valerie's claims, let her waste money on fishing expeditions. There's nothing to find. Miles studied his friend with concern. He knew they'd fight back, but this is becoming personal for them, especially Valerie. Camden Thornhill doesn't just attack assets. He destroys reputations. Are you prepared for how ugly this might get? Darren's expression hardened. They made it personal the moment they planned to destroy everything I've built. I'm not just defending myself anymore, Miles. I'm ensuring they understand the consequences of their choices. What's your next move? Acceleration, Darren replied, turning one of the monitors toward Miles. We're moving up Phoenix's timeline. New launch date is 4 weeks from today, a full 2 weeks before Archer's announced release. Miles looked stunned. That's impossible. We can't compress the development schedule that much without compromising quality. We can and we will, Darren insisted. I've restructured the development priorities and reallocated resources. The core security features are solid. We focus on those and defer the peripheral elements for post-launch updates. The team will push back. Some will, Darren acknowledged. Those who do can leave. I only want people who believe in what we're building. Miles recognized the determination in his friend's voice. What about Valerie and the divorce proceedings? Thornhill is creating a media narrative that you're an obsessive workaholic who neglected his wife and is now using corporate resources for personal vendettas. Let him, Darren said dismissively. Corporate performance speaks louder than tabloid accusations. When Phoenix launches successfully ahead of schedule, the narrative will shift. Success is the best defense. After Miles left, Darren returned to refining his counter-strategy. The accelerated timeline for Phoenix was aggressive but achievable. The team would need additional resources and incentives, but the core architecture was sound. Beating Archer to market would neutralize the advantage Wade had tried to create by leaking specifications. As for Valerie and her legal attacks, Darren had already transferred his divorce case to Spencer Coleman, a methodical family law attorney who specialized in high-conflict divorces involving prenuptial agreements. Unlike Thornhill's flamboyant approach, Coleman worked quietly and systematically, building detailed cases that withstood emotional appeals and media manipulation. The next phase of Darren's plan required a more direct approach to neutralizing Wade Preston's influence. Despite his termination from Meridian, Wade was leveraging his family connections to damage the company and, by extension, Darren's position. This needed to be addressed head-on. Through Bridget Navarro, Darren arranged a meeting with Lenora Washington at her private residence on Sunday morning, away from the office and potential leaks. Lenora's modern penthouse offered sweeping views of the city, the morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows as they sat in her minimalist living room. "I assume this isn't a social call," Lenora said, pouring coffee for them both. "I need your support for an aggressive countermeasure against the Prestons," Darren replied directly. "Wade's father is systematic in his attacks on our partnerships. We need to respond with equal force." "I'm listening." Darren outlined his proposal: a strategic partnership with Sumitomo Technological Enterprises, a Japanese conglomerate that was one of the Preston family's most significant business rivals. The partnership would include exclusive distribution rights for Project Phoenix in Asian markets, effectively cutting off expansion opportunities for any competing products, including Archer's version based on the stolen specifications. "Sumitomo has been pursuing us for years," Darren explained. "They've always been willing to offer favorable terms, but we've hesitated due to the Preston family's influence in European markets. With that relationship already compromised, we have nothing to lose and everything to gain." Lenora considered the proposal thoughtfully. "The board will be concerned about further antagonizing the Prestons." "The Prestons are already fully committed to our destruction," Darren countered. "This isn't escalation. It's strategic realignment based on new realities. Besides, Sumitomo's market position in Asia is stronger than the Prestons' European connections. It's a net positive for shareholders." After further discussion, Lenora agreed to present the partnership proposal to the board with her full support. "But," she cautioned, "be prepared for increased hostility from the Prestons. Leonard doesn't respond well to being outmaneuvered." "I'm counting on it," Darren replied, his expression revealing nothing of his deeper strategy. The following week brought a series of calculated moves and countermoves. The board approved the Sumitomo partnership by a narrow margin. As anticipated, Leonard Preston responded by leveraging his influence with several key Meridian investors, attempting to force a reconsideration of Darren's promotion to acting senior VP. What Leonard hadn't anticipated was Darren's preparation for this exact scenario. Through Bridget, Darren had already secured meetings with the wavering board members, providing them detailed projections of Phoenix's market potential with Sumitomo's distribution network. The numbers were compelling enough to maintain their support despite Preston's pressure. Meanwhile, Valerie's legal offensive continued to escalate. Camden Thornhill filed motions requesting full financial disclosure of not just Darren's personal accounts, but also any potential future compensation related to Project Phoenix, a transparent attempt to position Valerie for a claim on the project's success, despite the prenuptial agreement's limitations. Spencer Coleman countered with documented evidence of Valerie's systematic liquidation of joint investments prior to the divorce filing, a clear indication of premeditated financial maneuvering that violated the prenuptial terms. The legal battle became a war of attrition, with Thornhill filing motion after motion, each designed more to drain Darren's resources and attention than to achieve specific legal objectives. Coleman responded, minimizing court appearances and focusing on written submissions that required less of Darren's direct involvement. Through it all, Darren maintained his focus on Project Phoenix. The development team, inspired by his unwavering commitment and incentivized by substantial bonus structures, embraced the accelerated timeline. Working around the clock, they refined the core security architecture while strategically deferring less critical features. 4 weeks after announcing the accelerated schedule, Phoenix was ready for its soft launch, a limited release to key clients and industry analysts that would establish its market presence before Archer could finalize their competing product. The night before the soft launch, Darren worked late at the office, reviewing the final technical specifications and marketing materials. As he closed his laptop, preparing to finally head home for a few hours of sleep, his office phone rang. The number was unknown, but something compelled him to answer. "Blackwood," he said tersely. "Is this victory everything you hoped it would be?" Wade Preston's voice was slurred but recognizable. Darren considered hanging up, but instead leaned back in his chair. "It's not about victory, Wade. It's about consequences." "Consequences," Wade repeated with a bitter laugh. "You've destroyed everything I built. My career, my reputation. Even Valerie is distancing herself now that my family support is wavering." "You destroyed those things yourself," Darren replied evenly. "I simply ensured you couldn't escape the fallout. My father is preparing to escalate beyond anything you've anticipated," Wade warned, his tone oscillating between threat and desperation. "Leonard Preston doesn't lose business conflicts. There's a first time for everything," Darren said. "Is there an actual purpose to this call? Or are you just looking for someone to blame for your self-inflicted problems?" The line was silent for a moment before Wade spoke again, his voice suddenly clearer, more focused. "You think you understand what's happening, but you don't. This was never just about your wife or your project. You were a means to an end, an expendable component in a larger strategy." "What are you talking about?" "Phoenix isn't what you think it is," Wade said cryptically. "Ask yourself why Lenora was so eager to champion your project from the beginning. Why she protected you so vigorously when the evidence against me emerged. There are layers you haven't even begun to uncover." Before Darren could press for clarification, Wade ended the call. Darren sat motionless, processing this new information. Was this just the desperate misdirection of a fallen adversary? Or was there something to Wade's insinuations about Lenora and Project Phoenix? He dismissed the thought almost immediately. This was classic Wade, attempting to create doubt and division among his opponents when direct confrontation had failed. Lenora Washington had been nothing but supportive throughout the crisis, defending Darren to the board and backing his strategic decisions despite the risks. Yet as Darren drove home in the pre-dawn darkness, Wade's words lingered in his mind. In the complex chess game of corporate politics, he had been focusing on the obvious threats: Wade, Valerie, Leonard Preston, Archer Systems. Had he overlooked something fundamental about his own position on the board? The question would have to wait. In less than 8 hours, Project Phoenix would launch, marking either the culmination of his professional redemption or the beginning of an even more complex battle. Either way, there was no turning back now. Chapter 5: Phoenix Ascending. The soft launch of Project Phoenix exceeded even Darren's optimistic projections. Industry analysts immediately recognized the platform's revolutionary approach to cybersecurity, with several publishing glowing preliminary reviews highlighting its advantages over existing solutions. Key clients who received early access reported significant improvements in threat detection and response times compared to their current systems. Most satisfying was the reaction from Archer Systems. Their hastily developed competing product, based on Wade's stolen and incomplete specifications, was suddenly rendered obsolete before it could even officially launch. Their stock price dropped 12% on the day of Phoenix's debut as market analysts adjusted revenue projections in light of Meridian's unexpected early release. For Darren, the professional vindication was profound but incomplete. Wade's cryptic call the night before the launch had planted seeds of doubt that refused to be dismissed entirely. Despite Phoenix's success, or perhaps because of it, he found himself scrutinizing Lenora Washington's enthusiastic support with newfound suspicion. After the initial launch celebration with the development team, Darren retreated to his office to review Phoenix's architecture one more time. He had been so focused on beating Archer to market that he hadn't fully considered the possibility of hidden vulnerabilities or secondary objectives within the project itself. Hours of meticulous code review revealed nothing suspicious. The platform functioned exactly as designed, a testament to his team's skill and dedication. If there were deeper layers to Phoenix, as Wade had implied, they weren't evident in its technical implementation. As Darren was preparing to leave, Bridget Navarro appeared at his door. Despite the late hour, she was impeccably dressed as always, though her expression betrayed unusual concern. "Mr. Blackwood," she said softly, "may I speak with you privately?" Darren nodded, closing his office door. "What is it, Bridget?" "There's something you should know about Ms. Washington's interest in Project Phoenix," she began cautiously. "Something that may explain Mr. Preston's opposition beyond his personal animosity." Darren tensed. "Go on." "Ms. Washington has been in discussions with Helix Global about a potential acquisition of Meridian. These talks preceded Phoenix by several months, but accelerated significantly once your project demonstrated promising early results. Helix Global was one of the largest technology conglomerates in the world, known for strategic acquisitions of innovative companies. If they were interested in Meridian because of Phoenix, it would explain Lenora's unwavering support. A successful acquisition would significantly increase the value of her substantial company stock options." "How do you know this?" Darren asked. "I manage Ms. Washington's calendar and communications," Bridget replied simply. "Very little happens without my knowledge. And you're telling me this because loyalty to this company means more to me than personal gain," she said firmly. "If Helix acquires Meridian, they'll likely restructure significantly. Projects will be consolidated, positions eliminated. People who built this company will be discarded." She straightened her already perfect posture. "Including you, despite your contributions." The revelation aligned with Wade's cryptic warning, but raised more questions than it answered. Why would Preston oppose an acquisition that would likely benefit major shareholders like his family? "The Prestons and Helix have a complicated history," Bridget explained. "Leonard Preston's firm attempted a hostile takeover of Helix 15 years ago and failed spectacularly. The Preston family lost significant holdings and influence. They've opposed any Helix partnerships or acquisitions ever since." This new information required careful consideration. If Lenora's support for Phoenix was primarily motivated by positioning Meridian for acquisition, it didn't necessarily negate the project's value or Darren's achievements. But it did suggest he was potentially being used as a pawn in a larger corporate chess game, one where his ultimate value might be as disposable as Wade had suggested. "Thank you for telling me this, Bridget," Darren said finally. "I appreciate your discretion and loyalty." After she left, Darren called Miles, asking him to meet at Lorenzo's despite the late hour. This development required trusted counsel. Over late-night coffee in the nearly empty restaurant, Darren shared Bridget's revelation with his friend. "It makes sense," Miles acknowledged after processing the information. "Lenora's always been strategic about company value, and Phoenix is genuinely revolutionary. Exactly the kind of proprietary technology that would attract Helix. The question is whether this changes our approach," Darren said, stirring his coffee absently. "I've been operating under the assumption that Lenora's support was based on Phoenix's merit and Wade's clear misconduct. It probably was," Miles reasoned, "but with the additional motivation of positioning for acquisition. One doesn't exclude the other. If Helix acquires Meridian, what happens to Phoenix?" "To the team?" Darren asked. "Hard to say. Helix typically maintains successful product lines, but consolidates management. They might keep Phoenix, but reorganize leadership." Darren considered this carefully. "So I deliver a successful project that increases Meridian's acquisition value, only to potentially be sidelined once the deal closes. Meanwhile, Lenora and other major shareholders profit significantly from the increased valuation." "Welcome to corporate America," Miles said with a wry smile. "The question is what you're going to do with this information." Darren didn't respond immediately, his mind already formulating potential strategies. Unlike his confrontations with Wade and Valerie, this situation required nuance. Lenora Washington wasn't an adversary, at least not directly. Her interests and Darren's had aligned thus far, even if her ultimate motivations differed from what he'd assumed. "I need leverage," he concluded finally. Information that ensures my position remains secure regardless of corporate restructuring. What kind of information? Miles asked cautiously. I'm not sure yet, Darren admitted, but I know where to start looking. The following days were a careful balancing act. Publicly, Darren maintained his focus on Phoenix's successful rollout and the upcoming full market launch. The development team continued refining features based on early user feedback, while the marketing department prepared for a comprehensive promotional campaign. Privately, Darren began a discreet investigation into Lenora Washington's communications with Helix Global, with Bridget's tacit cooperation providing access to meeting schedules and Miles's technical expertise securing specific digital records. Darren gradually assembled a detailed picture of the acquisition discussions. What emerged was more complex than he had initially suspected. The potential acquisition wasn't simply about Phoenix, though the project had certainly accelerated Helix's interest. There were multiple strategic motivations, including Meridian's established client base, proprietary technologies beyond Phoenix, and geographical market presence that complemented Helix's existing portfolio. Most significantly, Darren discovered that Lenora had negotiated specific protections for key Meridian personnel as part of the preliminary acquisition terms. These included guaranteed roles for several senior executives and project leaders, with Darren named explicitly as the continued head of the Phoenix division post-acquisition. This revelation forced a reevaluation. Lenora hadn't been positioning Darren as a disposable asset. She'd been securing his future role as part of the negotiation strategy. Her support hadn't been merely self-interested, but had included protection for the team that had created Phoenix's value. The question now was whether to confront Lenora directly about these discoveries or to maintain the appearance of ignorance while developing contingency plans. After careful consideration, Darren opted for a middle approach, a conversation that would signal his awareness without direct accusation. He requested a private meeting with Lenora, ostensibly to discuss Phoenix's expansion strategy. When they were alone in her office, he carefully steered the conversation toward the company's long-term future. Phoenix has exceeded market expectations, he noted. We're already fielding partnership inquiries from several major technology conglomerates. Lenora studied him carefully. Including Helix Global, I understand. Yes, Darren confirmed. Their VP of Corporate Development was particularly interested in our proprietary encryption protocols. He mentioned potential synergies with their existing security infrastructure. A subtle tension appeared in Lenora's posture. Helix has always been interested in cutting-edge security solutions. It's natural they'd reach out given Phoenix's success. Absolutely, Darren agreed casually, though I wonder if their interest extends beyond Phoenix to Meridian as a whole. Their acquisition strategy has been quite aggressive recently. The momentary flicker in Lenora's eyes confirmed his suspicions before she regained her composure. Corporate development teams explore all possibilities. It's their job to identify potential acquisitions, partnerships, and competitive threats. Of course, Darren said with a slight smile. Just as it's my job to ensure Phoenix's continued success regardless of any potential corporate restructuring. The message was clear without being explicit. Lenora regarded him with newfound respect, recognizing that he had uncovered at least part of the acquisition discussions. Meridian values your contributions tremendously, Darren, she said finally. Whatever the company's future holds, your position is secure. I made that explicitly clear to all relevant parties. I appreciate that, Darren replied, and I trust those assurances are formalized in any preliminary agreements that might exist. Lenora's slight nod was confirmation enough. Your focus should remain on Phoenix's successful deployment. Other matters will resolve themselves appropriately. That's always been my primary concern, Darren assured her. Phoenix represents the future of cybersecurity. Ensuring its successful implementation and continued development is my highest priority, regardless of the corporate structure supporting it. With that understanding established, Darren's professional position was more secure than ever. Phoenix continued its successful market penetration, receiving industry accolades and rapidly acquiring clients from competitors, including several who abandoned Archer Systems' hastily released alternative. On the personal front, however, Valerie and Camden Thornhill maintained their aggressive legal campaign. Having failed to gain traction with financial claims due to the prenuptial agreement's clear infidelity provisions, they shifted to character assassination. Thornhill leaked selective communications to industry publications suggesting Darren had used corporate resources for personal vendettas and had created a hostile work environment for female employees. These accusations gained little traction given Darren's documented professional conduct and Meridian's strong HR practices, but they represented a continuing drain on his time and emotional resources. Spencer Coleman advised patience, noting that Thornhill's increasingly desperate tactics indicated a weakening position. They're running out of viable legal strategies, Coleman explained during a brief meeting. These character attacks are designed to frustrate you into making a generous settlement offer just to end the harassment. I won't be manipulated, Darren responded firmly. Not again. Good, Coleman nodded approvingly, because I've identified a significant vulnerability in their approach. Thornhill's media leaks likely involve confidential discovery materials, which violates ethical standards for attorneys. I'm preparing a bar complaint that could seriously compromise his ability to continue representing Mrs. Blackwood. This development, combined with Phoenix's undeniable success, began to shift the balance of power in the divorce proceedings. Valerie, recognizing the deteriorating strategic position, initiated direct communication for the first time since their confrontation at the house. We need to talk, without lawyers. One final conversation to end this respectfully. Darren considered ignoring the message, but ultimately decided that a controlled, final encounter might accelerate resolution. He agreed to meet at a neutral location, a private meeting room at Coleman's law office where their conversation would be documented but private. Valerie arrived immaculately dressed as always, though Darren noted subtle signs of strain beneath her polished exterior. The confident swagger had diminished, replaced by a more measured approach. Thank you for agreeing to meet, she began as they sat across from each other at the conference table. I think we both recognize this situation has escalated beyond what's constructive for either of us. What did you expect when you conspired with Wade to destroy my career while planning to divorce me? Darren asked calmly. Valerie sighed. I won't justify my actions. They were wrong, deeply wrong. But this continuing legal battle isn't benefiting anyone except our attorneys. Your attorney, Darren corrected. Mine has been quite effective at minimal cost, simply by following the prenuptial agreement we both signed. That's precisely my point, Valerie said, leaning forward. The prenup is clear. With the documented infidelity, my financial position is limited regardless of how long we fight. I'm prepared to accept those terms and move forward. Darren studied her carefully, searching for the manipulation that had characterized their relationship for so long. Why the sudden reasonableness? Last I heard, Thornhill was preparing another round of media allegations. I've terminated Camden's services, Valerie admitted. His approach wasn't achieving results, just generating billable hours and unnecessary animosity. She hesitated before continuing. And the truth is, I've had time to reflect on my choices. What I did was inexcusable, Darren. The lies, the betrayal, all of it. Spare me the contrition, Darren said, unmoved. If you've accepted the prenuptial terms, have your new attorney contact Spencer. We can finalize everything within weeks. Valerie nodded, then asked quietly, and the personal aspects? The anger, the bitterness? Do we just carry that forward indefinitely? That's entirely up to you, Darren replied. I'm focused on my future, not our past. Phoenix is successful beyond all projections. Meridian is positioned for significant growth. My professional reputation has never been stronger. He stood, signaling the end of the conversation. I have no interest in carrying anger forward, Valerie. But I have even less interest in false reconciliation or manufactured closure. As he reached the door, Valerie spoke one final time. Wade was wrong about you, you know. You weren't the working-class boy who reached beyond his capabilities. You were always exactly as capable as you believed yourself to be. She offered a sad smile. That's what I first loved about you, before ambition and resentment clouded everything else. Darren acknowledged her words with a slight nod before leaving. There was no satisfaction in seeing Valerie's defeat, only a hollow confirmation that the woman he had married had never truly existed. The person sitting in that conference room, offering belated respect only after all other options had failed, was the real Valerie Conway Blackwood, someone he had never truly known. With the divorce proceedings moving toward resolution on his terms and Phoenix firmly established as a market leader, Darren's professional and personal redemption seemed nearly complete. Yet Wade Preston's cryptic warning and the revealed acquisition discussions with Helix Global suggested there were still aspects of the situation he didn't fully comprehend. The final pieces would fall into place sooner than he anticipated, triggered by an unexpected source: Leonard Preston's escalating vendetta against both Darren and Meridian Technologies. Chapter 6. Checkmate. 3 days after Darren's meeting with Valerie, Leonard Preston launched his most aggressive move yet. Having failed to undermine Project Phoenix through market maneuvers and board pressure, the Preston family patriarch turned to more direct methods. Through shell companies and proxy investors, he initiated a stealth accumulation of Meridian stock, positioning for a potential hostile takeover. The strategy was well concealed, distributing purchases across multiple entities to avoid triggering regulatory disclosure requirements. Had it not been for Bridget Navarro's vigilant monitoring of unusual trading patterns, an habitual caution developed over decades in corporate environments, the threat might have gone undetected until it was too late. "Mr. Blackwood," Bridget said, appearing at Darren's office without appointment, her typically composed demeanor visibly strained. "We have a serious situation developing. Someone is systematically acquiring significant blocks of Meridian stock through various intermediaries. The pattern suggests preparation for a hostile action." Darren immediately grasped the implications. "Preston," Bridget nodded. "The methods are consistent with tactics he's employed in previous corporate conflicts. Ms. Washington is currently traveling, returning tomorrow afternoon. She needs to be informed immediately." "I'll handle it," Darren assured her. "And Bridget, thank you. Your vigilance may have saved the company." After Bridget left, Darren contacted Miles and Spencer Coleman, assembling an impromptu crisis team. While Miles worked to identify the specific entities involved in the stock purchases, Spencer outlined potential defensive strategies based on Meridian's corporate bylaws and applicable securities regulations. "If it is indeed Leonard Preston," Spencer explained, "his ultimate objective is likely removing you and installing leadership more aligned with family interests. The quickest path would be acquiring enough shares to force a board reorganization, which would effectively kill the Helix acquisition discussions," Darren noted, "meaning both Lenora's and my interests align perfectly in opposing this." "Exactly," Spencer confirmed. "Though without Lenora here to officially authorize defensive measures, our immediate options are limited." By evening, Miles had confirmed their suspicions. The purchasing patterns traced back to entities previously used by Preston family investment vehicles. Based on estimated acquisition volume, Leonard Preston likely controlled between 12 and 15% of Meridian's outstanding shares. Not enough for control, but sufficient to create significant disruption. "He's moving faster than we anticipated," Miles observed. "At this rate, he could reach 20% within days. That would give him enough leverage to demand board seats and potentially block any acquisition attempts. We need to slow him down while we develop a counter-strategy," Darren said. "What are our options without Lenora's direct authorization?" Spencer considered the question carefully. "There's a provision in Meridian's bylaws allowing the acting senior VP to implement temporary protective measures in the CEO's absence if there's a credible threat to company stability. It's limited in scope and duration, but it might buy us the time we need." Using this provision, Darren initiated a 48-hour freeze on large block stock transfers, a rarely invoked emergency measure designed to prevent market manipulation. This would temporarily halt Preston's acquisition efforts until Lenora returned and could implement more comprehensive defenses. The move was immediately challenged by Preston's attorneys, generating urgent communications that further confirmed their suspicions about the source of the stock purchases. The legal challenge would take time to resolve, however, accomplishing Darren's primary objective of delaying further acquisitions. With this temporary barrier in place, Darren turned his attention to a more offensive strategy. If Preston was attempting to block the Helix acquisition through stock manipulation, accelerating those discussions might be the most effective counter. Though he lacked authority to negotiate directly on Meridian's behalf, Darren could certainly provide Helix with updated Phoenix performance metrics that would strengthen their acquisition interest. Through careful back-channel communications facilitated by Bridget, Darren ensured that Helix's corporate development team received comprehensive documentation of Phoenix's market success and projected revenue growth. The message was clear without being explicit. The window for acquisition at the current valuation was closing rapidly. The strategy produced immediate results. By the following morning, Helix had requested an accelerated meeting with Meridian's executive leadership as soon as Lenora returned. Market analysts began speculating about potential acquisition interest, driving Meridian's stock price upward and making Preston's accumulation efforts more expensive. When Lenora arrived the next afternoon, she was fully briefed on both the Preston threat and Darren's interim defensive measures. Far from being concerned about his initiative in her absence, she expressed appreciation for his quick response. "Leonard Preston has been attempting to undermine my leadership since I became CEO," she noted during their private meeting. "This latest move is desperate even by standards. He's specifically targeting Phoenix and my position," Darren explained. "This goes beyond typical corporate maneuvering. It's become a personal vendetta extending from his son's situation." Lenora's expression hardened. The Preston family has always conflated business and personal matters. It's their fundamental weakness. She reviewed the materials Darren had prepared. "You've handled this situation admirably, Darren. The Helix acceleration particularly was well conceived." "Thank you," Darren replied. "Though I should acknowledge it required some assumptions about your acquisition discussions that weren't officially disclosed to me." A slight smile crossed Lenora's face. "Yes, Bridget mentioned you become aware of those negotiations. I expected nothing less from someone of your capabilities." She leaned forward. "Let's be direct with each other. Helix's interest in Meridian predates Phoenix, but your project has significantly increased their acquisition urgency. If a deal closes, I stand to gain considerably through my equity position, as do most major shareholders," Darren noted. "Indeed. But unlike Leonard Preston, I've never believed in sacrificing talented leaders for short-term gain. The preliminary terms include specific provisions maintaining your position and autonomy over Phoenix post-acquisition, not as a courtesy, but because it makes sound business sense." "I appreciate that transparency," Darren said sincerely. "Transparency will be essential in what comes next," Lenora continued. "Preston won't abandon his efforts easily. His pride won't allow it. We need a decisive response that neutralizes this threat permanently while simultaneously accelerating the Helix discussions." What followed was an intensive strategy session that extended late into the evening. Lenora authorized a series of defensive measures, including a shareholder rights plan, commonly known as a poison pill, that would make continued hostile accumulation prohibitively expensive. Simultaneously, she fast-tracked the Helix negotiations, personally calling their CEO to convey urgency. These corporate maneuvers were necessary but insufficient. As Darren had learned through his confrontations with Wade and Valerie, purely defensive responses merely prolonged conflict rather than resolving it. A comprehensive solution required understanding and addressing the underlying motivations driving the aggression. Leonard Preston's actions are ultimately about legacy and control, Darren observed as they reviewed potential scenarios. His son's professional destruction threatens both. This stock play isn't just about blocking the Helix deal. It's about restoring family prestige by destroying those responsible for Wade's downfall. Lenora considered this perspective. "You may be right. The Preston family has always viewed corporate conflict as a zero-sum game. They don't just want to win. They need their opponents to lose," which suggests a potential resolution beyond standard corporate defenses, Darren continued. If we address the core motivation rather than just the tactical expression, we might find a more permanent solution. What are you suggesting? A direct approach, Darren said decisively. I'll meet with Leonard Preston personally. The proposal was unorthodox but compelling. After further discussion, Lenora agreed, though with specific parameters to protect Meridian's interests. The meeting would be unofficial, exploratory rather than negotiating, with no commitments made without board approval. Arranging the meeting proved surprisingly simple. Despite his aggressive corporate maneuvers, Leonard Preston maintained the social formalities of his class and position. A request for a private conversation between gentlemen, properly phrased and delivered through appropriate channels, received prompt acceptance. The following evening, Darren arrived at the Preston family's downtown club, an exclusive establishment dating back to the Gilded Age, where old money still conducted its most important conversations away from public scrutiny. The wood-paneled private room, with its leather chairs and subtle lighting, projected exactly the atmosphere of power and tradition that defined the Preston worldview. Leonard Preston himself embodied that tradition, tall and imposing at 72, with the same slicked-back hairstyle as his son, though his was completely silver. His bespoke suit and subtle signet ring completed the image of hereditary privilege. "Mr. Blackwood," he acknowledged as Darren entered, not rising from his chair or extending his hand. "I must admit curiosity about this meeting. You've proven more resilient than anticipated." "Mr. Preston," Darren replied, taking the seat across from him without waiting for invitation. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I believe we can resolve our current situation more efficiently through direct conversation than continued proxy battles." Preston studied him with cold calculation. "My family has been resolving situations in this club for 3 generations, Mr. Blackwood, though typically with individuals of similar background and understanding." The class distinction was intentional, a reminder of Darren's outsider status in Preston's world. Rather than taking offense, Darren used it as an opening. "That's precisely why this conversation is necessary," he said calmly. "We perceive this conflict from fundamentally different perspectives. You see it as a matter of family honor and appropriate social hierarchy. I see it as a straightforward consequence of actions and choices." Preston's eyebrow raised slightly. "An interesting assessment. And what actions and choices justify your systematic destruction of my son's career and reputation?" "Corporate espionage, attempting to sabotage a critical company project for personal gain, conspiring with my wife to manipulate both professional and personal matters." Darren listed the offenses without emotion, each representing choices your son made with full awareness of potential consequences. "Boys will be boys, Mr. Blackwood," Preston dismissed with a wave of his hand. "Corporate competition has always involved certain ethical flexibilities. The truly unforgivable offense was your disproportionate response, designed not merely to protect your position, but to utterly destroy Wade's standing and future prospects." "There was nothing disproportionate about it," Darren countered. "Wade and Valerie planned the complete dismantling of my career and marriage. They discussed it explicitly, repeatedly, over months. I simply ensured they experienced the consequences of their own strategy." Preston leaned forward slightly. "Let's set aside motivations and focus on current realities. Your project is successful. My son's career is in ruins. Your position at Meridian is secure. What possible resolution could this conversation achieve beyond your personal satisfaction in confronting me?" "The resolution of your ongoing attempts to gain control of Meridian through stock acquisition," Darren replied directly. "Actions that threaten not just my position, but the company's stability and shareholder value, including your own existing holdings." Preston smiled thinly. "So, this is a negotiation. What are you offering in exchange for my disengagement?" "Understanding," Darren said simply, "of why your strategy will fail regardless of how many shares you acquire or how much capital you deploy." Preston's expression hardened. "Young man, I've been executing corporate acquisitions since before you entered community college. My resources and experience are irrelevant in this specific situation, Darren interrupted, something few people dared do with Leonard Preston. Because you're fighting the last war, using strategies that don't address current realities. Explain, Preston demanded, irritation evident in his clipped tone. Your objective is blocking the Helix acquisition while positioning yourself or a designated representative to influence Meridian's leadership, Darren began. You're acquiring shares to force board representation, planning to create internal opposition to the Helix deal while simultaneously undermining my position as retribution for Wade's situation. Preston remained silent, his lack of denial confirmation enough. The strategy fails for 3 specific reasons, Darren continued. First, the Helix negotiations have accelerated significantly in response to your stock purchases. Preliminary terms have been accepted by both leadership teams, with formal announcement pending final board approval, which is already secured by the necessary majority. Second, Meridian's bylaws contain specific anti-takeover provisions triggered by precisely the acquisition pattern you've employed. These provisions, now activated, effectively neutralize the voting power of your recently acquired shares for any leadership decisions over the next 18 months. And third, Darren concluded, your strategy fundamentally misunderstands the nature of Project Phoenix and my relationship to it. The intellectual property and implementation architecture are structured in a way that makes my continued leadership essential to its ongoing development, regardless of corporate ownership. This reality is reflected in the acquisition terms, which guarantee my position and autonomy post-merger. The subtle shift in Preston's expression confirmed Darren had accurately assessed both the strategy and its vulnerabilities. After a measured silence, Preston spoke with grudging respect. You've done your homework, Mr. Blackwood. Assuming your assertions are accurate, what alternative resolution are you proposing? A mutual stand-down, Darren replied. You halt all hostile stock accumulation and board interference attempts. In exchange, Meridian doesn't invoke further anti-takeover provisions that would potentially affect your existing legitimate holdings. Your current shares remain a valuable investment as Meridian's value increases through either the Helix acquisition or Phoenix's ongoing success. And my son, Preston asked, the personal concern briefly overwhelming his business calculation. Wade's actions have consequences that cannot be undone, Darren said firmly. But with your cooperation in resolving this conflict, I would have no objection to a statement from Meridian clarifying that his departure resulted from policy violations rather than criminal misconduct. This might facilitate his eventual rehabilitation in adjacent industries. Preston considered the proposal with the careful evaluation of a lifelong strategist. A reasonable framework, he acknowledged finally, though I would require certain assurances regarding the treatment of Preston family investments in any final acquisition terms. I'm confident those details can be addressed to mutual satisfaction, Darren agreed. Lenora values resolving this conflict cleanly, provided core company and shareholder interests remain protected. As the conversation concluded with a tentative understanding, Leonard Preston finally extended his hand across the table. You would have made a formidable opponent in my prime, Mr. Blackwood. I underestimated you, as did my son. A common mistake, Darren replied, accepting the handshake. One I've learned to use to my advantage. The resolution with Leonard Preston marked the final piece falling into place. Over the following weeks, Preston's proxy entities quietly ceased their stock accumulation. The Helix acquisition moved forward with board approval, including negotiated protections for existing major investors. Project Phoenix continued its successful market expansion, cementing Darren's position as its irreplaceable architect and leader. On the personal front, Valerie's divorce proceedings concluded with her acceptance of the prenuptial terms. The financial settlement was modest by her original expectations, but fair under the documented circumstances. More importantly for Darren, the resolution came without further media manipulation or character attacks, allowing him to maintain his professional reputation intact. The final symbolic conclusion came 6 months after the initial confrontation at Wade's beach house. Following the successful completion of the Helix acquisition, Darren was promoted to Executive Vice President of Security Solutions, with expanded authority over multiple product lines beyond Phoenix. His new office was located on the executive floor, directly adjacent to the one formerly occupied by Wade Preston. On the day he moved into the new office, a small package arrived without sender information. Inside was a single chess piece, a black king, with a handwritten note, "Checkmate, well played." LP. Darren placed the piece on his credenza as a reminder that in both corporate and personal conflicts, victory comes not from emotional reaction, but from strategic anticipation of the opponent's movements. Wade and Valerie had fundamentally misunderstood this principle, believing their elaborate deception provided absolute advantage. They never recognized that their greatest vulnerability was their absolute certainty in his ignorance. As Darren settled into his new role, the lessons of the past year shaped his approach to leadership. The betrayal had been painful but ultimately clarifying, stripping away illusions about both his marriage and the corporate world he navigated. What remained was a clearer understanding of his own capabilities and the importance of genuine loyalty in both professional and personal relationships. Miles Ramirez, now promoted to Chief Security Officer following the acquisition, remained his closest friend and ally. Bridget Navarro continued as the organizational linchpin, her institutional knowledge and discreet information gathering proving invaluable during the transition to Helix ownership. These authentic connections, based on mutual respect rather than manipulation, formed the foundation of Darren's rebuilt life. The final epilogue came unexpectedly, nearly a year after the initial confrontation. While traveling for a security conference in London, Darren encountered Valerie at a hotel bar. She was with an older European businessman, wearing the practiced smile of professional charm that had once been directed at him. Their eyes met briefly across the room. No words were exchanged, no acknowledgement offered beyond a moment of recognition. Darren simply nodded slightly and continued his conversation with colleagues, giving her situation no more thought than it deserved. Later that evening, as he reviewed presentation materials in his hotel room, Darren reflected on how completely his life had transformed since discovering Valerie's betrayal. The pain and rage that had initially driven his response had evolved into something more valuable, a fundamental recalibration of his understanding of both himself and the world he navigated. Wade and Valerie had believed him pathetic, easily manipulated, too focused on work to recognize their deception. In their arrogance, they had created the architect of their own downfall, transforming a dedicated professional into a strategic adversary who understood that in both business and personal conflicts, victory belongs not to those who strike first, but to those who anticipate the final move. Darren closed his laptop and gazed out at the London skyline, content in the knowledge that he had not merely survived their betrayal, but had emerged stronger, wiser, and ultimately victorious on every front that mattered. The replacement they had so carefully planned had indeed occurred, not of Darren Blackwood, but of the naive, trusting person he had once been. In his place stood someone far more formidable, a man who understood the true nature of both corporate and personal power, and who would never again be underestimated by those foolish enough to position themselves as his adversaries. Chapter 7: Ascension. 18 months after the Helix acquisition, Darren Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 42nd floor of Helix Global's New York headquarters. The Manhattan skyline spread before him like a concrete and glass chessboard, a fitting metaphor for the corporate world he had mastered through strategic foresight and disciplined execution. At 45, he had achieved what most executives spent entire careers pursuing. As Executive Vice President of Security Solutions, he oversaw a division generating over $2 billion in annual revenue. Project Phoenix had evolved into the industry-leading Helix Guardian platform, with market penetration exceeding all projections. His compensation package included equity options currently valued at 8 figures, with performance triggers promising substantial additional growth. By conventional metrics, Darren had won completely. The betrayals that had once threatened to destroy both his career and personal life had instead catalyzed his most significant professional advancements. Wade Preston had disappeared into obscure consultancy roles, his family connections insufficient to overcome the professional disgrace of his documented misconduct. Valerie had remarried, a European investment banker 20 years her senior, and relocated to Geneva, effectively removing herself from Darren's sphere entirely. Yet despite these victories, Darren found himself increasingly restless. The challenges that had once consumed his focus now felt routine. The corporate maneuvers that had once required his full strategic attention were handled almost automatically, his team executing based on frameworks he had established years earlier. Mr. Blackwood? His executive assistant's voice interrupted his contemplation. Your 2 p.m. with the Singapore team is ready in conference room A. Thank you, Christine, he acknowledged, turning from the window. And the materials for the board presentation tomorrow? Finalized and distributed as requested. Mr. Ramirez asked if you'd be available for dinner this evening to discuss the Taiwan expansion. Darren nodded. Schedule that for 7 p.m. at Lorenzo's. He'll know the location. As he navigated the remaining meetings of the day, Darren maintained the focused efficiency that had become his professional signature. But beneath the polished exterior, questions lingered about the ultimate purpose of his continued ascension. The revenge that had once motivated his strategic brilliance had been achieved long ago. The professional vindication had been complete. What drove him now? That evening at Lorenzo's, the Italian bistro that had become a tradition for important conversations with Miles, Darren found himself confronting these questions more directly than he had anticipated. You seem distracted, Miles observed after they had covered the necessary business regarding the Taiwan security operations expansion. Unusual for you. Darren smiled slightly. Just considering next moves. Taiwan is solid. The executive team supports the expansion unanimously. The board approval tomorrow is a formality. Miles studied his friend carefully. But that's not what you're contemplating, is it? No, Darren admitted. I'm thinking more broadly about direction. Purpose. Miles nodded, unsurprised. The inevitable reflection after achieving all strategic objectives. What does victory mean when there are no more immediate battles to fight? Something like that, Darren agreed, appreciating his friend's perceptiveness. The Phoenix Project, now Guardian, was about creating something revolutionary, something that mattered beyond quarterly targets or market position. The past year has been more about optimization than innovation. So you're bored, Miles summarized with a slight smile. The most dangerous state for a mind like yours. Not bored, Darren corrected, questioning whether this is the endpoint or a plateau before something more significant. Like what? That's what I haven't fully defined yet, Darren admitted. When Wade and Valerie betrayed me, the path forward was clear: survive, expose, reclaim, advance. Each phase had specific objectives and metrics. Now, he gestured vaguely. Success feels somewhat hollow. Miles considered this thoughtfully. You know, throughout this entire journey, from the night I showed you that photo of Valerie's car at Preston's beach house, you've been focused on external validation, proving yourself to adversaries who underestimated you. Maybe the next phase isn't about proving anything to anyone else. Maybe it's about defining success entirely on your own terms. The observation resonated more deeply than Darren had expected. His entire career trajectory, from his working-class origins through his rise at Meridian and now Helix, had been shaped by an underlying need to demonstrate his capabilities to others. His response to Wade and Valerie's betrayal had been ultimately about proving them wrong in their assessment of him as pathetic and manipulable. My own terms, Darren repeated contemplatively. What would that even look like? That's the question only you can answer, Miles replied. But I suspect it involves building something that outlasts quarterly reports or stock valuations. Something with impact beyond corporate boundaries. The conversation shifted to other topics, but Miles's perspective lingered in Darren's thoughts long after dinner concluded. As he returned to his penthouse apartment, a modern, minimalist space he had purchased following the divorce, he found himself considering a fundamental reassessment of his direction. The next morning, Darren delivered his board presentation with characteristic precision. The Taiwan expansion was approved unanimously, with several board members specifically commending the strategic foresight reflected in the implementation timeline. Yet throughout the meeting, part of Darren's mind remained engaged with the more personal strategic question that had emerged from his conversation with Miles. After the board meeting, an unexpected encounter provided additional perspective on this emerging reconsideration. As Darren was leaving the executive floor, he encountered Lenora Washington, who had transitioned to Helix's board following the acquisition after a brief tenure as integration consultant. "Darren," she greeted warmly. "Excellent presentation. The board is consistently impressed with your division's performance." "Thank you, Lenora," he replied. "The team deserves most of the credit for execution." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but the strategic architecture is unmistakably yours." She glanced at her watch. "Do you have a few minutes? There's something I'd like to discuss." They moved to a small executive lounge adjacent to the boardroom, securing privacy for their conversation. "I've been following your work closely," Lenora began once they were seated. "Not just the financial metrics, which are exemplary, but the underlying direction. You're positioning Guardian for applications beyond traditional corporate security." Darren nodded, impressed by her observation. "The core architecture has potential applications in critical infrastructure protection, healthcare data security, and several other sectors with significant social impact." "Exactly," Lenora said with approval. "Which is why I want to talk with you about a personal project I've been developing since stepping back from operational leadership." She explained that she had established a foundation focused on cybersecurity protections for nonprofit organizations, healthcare providers in underserved communities, and educational institutions with limited technical resources. These entities were increasingly targeted by sophisticated attacks, but lacked the resources to implement enterprise-grade security solutions. "The foundation needs technical leadership," Lenora continued. "Someone who understands both the security architecture and the strategic implementation in resource-constrained environments. Someone with vision beyond conventional corporate applications." The implication was clear, though Lenora made no explicit offer. She was suggesting a potential direction that aligned with Darren's emerging questions about purpose and impact. "It's an interesting concept," Darren acknowledged. "The vulnerability gap between well-resourced corporations and essential service providers is widening dangerously." "Indeed," Lenora agreed. "And addressing that gap requires more than conventional corporate approaches. It needs innovation unconstrained by quarterly reporting pressures or shareholder expectations." As they concluded their conversation, Lenora left him with a final thought. "When I first supported Project Phoenix at Meridian, I recognized something in your approach that went beyond typical project management or technical leadership. You were building something you believed mattered fundamentally, not just something that would advance your career or generate revenue." "That was the original vision," Darren confirmed. "Consider whether that vision has been fully realized within the current corporate structure," Lenora suggested, "or whether it might require a different framework to achieve its full potential." The conversation with Lenora crystallized something Darren had been sensing but hadn't fully articulated. His restlessness wasn't simply about seeking new challenges within the established corporate hierarchy. It was about questioning whether that hierarchy was the appropriate vehicle for his evolving vision of what Guardian could become. Over the following weeks, Darren began an exploration of alternatives. He maintained his executive responsibilities with undiminished effectiveness while dedicating evenings and weekends to researching models for technology deployment in public service contexts. The potential applications for Guardian security architecture in protecting vulnerable infrastructure, hospitals, municipal systems, educational networks, offered a pathway to impact that transcended conventional corporate success metrics. During this exploration phase, an unexpected communication arrived from Spencer Coleman, the attorney who had handled Darren's divorce. A routine financial notification regarding the final resolution of a property division matter included a brief personal note. "Thought you might find the attached article relevant to your interests. The Preston family appears to be facing challenges beyond your situation." The attached news item detailed significant financial and legal troubles facing Preston Holdings, the family's primary investment vehicle. Leonard Preston had stepped down as chairman following a series of unsuccessful ventures and regulatory investigations. The company that had once represented old money power and influence was now selling assets to meet debt obligations. Darren read the article with detached interest rather than satisfaction. The Preston family's decline represented neither victory nor vindication to him now, merely the natural consequence of strategic miscalculations and changing market realities. The dynasty that had once seemed untouchable had proven vulnerable to the same forces that affected any business enterprise. More significant than the Preston situation was its effect on Darren's perspective. He realized that he felt no residual animosity or desire for further retribution. The chess game that had once consumed his strategic focus was long concluded, the victory secure but increasingly irrelevant to his current considerations. This emotional distance from past conflicts created space for more forward-looking evaluation. Darren began structuring a comprehensive analysis of what Lenora had proposed, a potential transition from corporate leadership to directing technology innovation for social impact. The assessment, evaluating professional, financial, and personal dimensions with the same strategic rigor he applied to business decisions. Professionally, such a shift would mean exchanging his current trajectory, likely culminating in a CEO position within 5 years, for leadership in a sector with different metrics of success and recognition. Financially, it would require significant adjustment to compensation expectations, though his existing resources were more than sufficient for lifetime security. Personally, it represented the most intriguing dimension, the opportunity to define success entirely on his own terms rather than through external validation or competitive positioning. As this analysis progressed, Darren maintained his characteristic compartmentalization. His daily leadership of the Security Solutions Division continued with undiminished effectiveness. Quarterly results exceeded projections. The Taiwan expansion proceeded on schedule. To colleagues and the executive team, he remained the focused, strategic leader whose rational decision-making had become legendary within the organization. Only Miles Ramirez observed the subtle indicators of Darren's internal recalibration, his increasing interest in applications beyond corporate clients, his questions about security implementations in resource-constrained environments, his occasional references to impact metrics beyond revenue and market share. "You're seriously considering Lenora's foundation, aren't you?" Miles asked during one of their regular dinner meetings at Lorenzo's. Darren smiled slightly. "Am I that transparent?" "Only to someone who's known you for 20 years, Miles assured him. "To everyone else, you're still the consummate corporate executive. But I've noticed a shift in your focus. You're mapping exit strategies and transition scenarios." "Preliminary evaluation only," Darren clarified. "A thorough analysis of alternatives is just good practice, regardless of the ultimate decision." Of course, Miles agreed with knowing amusement. "Just as your detailed research into foundation governance structures and nonprofit leadership models is purely theoretical." Darren acknowledged the observation with a slight nod. "The corporate structure has served its purpose effectively. I've achieved the objectives I set following the Meridian situation. The question now is whether that structure remains the optimal vehicle for what I want to accomplish next." "And what is that exactly?" Miles asked. "Beyond the professional terminology and strategic frameworks, what do you actually want to build in this next phase?" The question penetrated Darren's carefully maintained analytical distance, requiring a more personal response than he typically offered. After a thoughtful pause, he answered with uncharacteristic directness. "Protection for those without power or resources to protect themselves," he said simply. "The core Guardian architecture could be adapted to secure critical systems for entities that can't afford enterprise solutions. Hospitals serving vulnerable populations, municipal infrastructure in economically disadvantaged communities, educational institutions with limited technical resources." The antithesis of the Preston family approach to power and influence, Miles observed. "Perhaps," Darren acknowledged, "though I'm not approaching this as a reaction to that experience. It's more about recognizing where the technology could have the most meaningful impact." "I believe you," Miles said sincerely. And for what it's worth, I think you'd be exceptional in that role. The same strategic brilliance that made you formidable in corporate conflicts will be transformative when applied to protecting those who can't protect themselves. Darren nodded, appreciating his friend's support. There's one more dimension to consider before making any decisions. What's that? You, Darren said simply. Any transition I make would affect your position as well. Our professional trajectories have been aligned since Meridian. I wouldn't make a change that undermines what we've built together. Miles laughed softly. I wonder when you'd get to that. Always analyzing every variable. He leaned forward. Look, I followed you from Meridian to Helix because I believe in your vision and leadership. If that vision evolves beyond corporate boundaries, why will my loyalty be limited by organizational charts? You're suggesting you consider a similar transition? I'm suggesting that true partnerships transcend specific employment structures, Miles clarified. If you determine this foundation offers the best vehicle for your next chapter, we can discuss what role might make sense for me within that framework. Or I might remain at Helix as your inside connection to corporate resources. The conversation shifted to practical considerations, but Darren felt a subtle weight lifting. The strategic analysis would continue, but with the knowledge that his most valued professional relationship wasn't dependent on maintaining his current corporate position. 2 weeks later, Darren requested a private meeting with Jeffrey Hammond, Helix Global CEO. The timing was deliberate. Following the successful quarterly earnings report and the positive initial results from the Taiwan expansion, he would approach this conversation from a position of strength rather than necessity. Hammond welcomed him into his office with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to wielding significant power. At 62, he had guided Helix through multiple market evolutions, maintaining growth while competitors faltered. His respect for Darren was evident but measured, the cautious appreciation one strategic mind offers another. Your division's performance continues to impress the board, Hammond began after they were seated in the comfortable seating area away from his desk. The Guardian platform is positioning us years ahead of competitors in critical security markets. Thank you, Darren acknowledged. The team has executed exceptionally well on the foundational architecture we established. Hammond studied him with a perceptiveness that had made him a formidable CEO. But you're not here to discuss quarterly results. Something more substantive is on your mind. Yes, Darren confirmed, appreciating the direct approach. I'm exploring a potential transition that would allow Guardian's core technology to address security vulnerabilities beyond our traditional corporate client base. He outlined the concept in broad terms, adapting the security architecture for implementation in resource-constrained environments like public healthcare, educational institutions, and municipal infrastructure. These sectors faced increasingly sophisticated threats, but lacked the resources for enterprise-grade protection. Lenora Washington's foundation, Hammond said, demonstrating his characteristic awareness of organizational dynamics. She mentioned the concept during our last board dinner. I wondered if she'd approach you about technical leadership. She suggested possibilities rather than making specific offers, Darren clarified. But the concept aligns with my assessment of where Guardian could have most meaningful impact beyond current applications. Hammond considered this thoughtfully. You recognize this would represent a significant shift from your current trajectory. Most executives in your position are focusing on the path to CEO succession, not nonprofit leadership. I do, Darren acknowledged. It's not a decision I'm approaching lightly. No, you wouldn't, Hammond agreed with a slight smile. Methodical strategic evaluation is your hallmark. So I assume you've already mapped potential transition scenarios that would minimize disruption to the Security Solutions division while maximizing long-term value for both Helix and this new direction. Several options, Darren confirmed, impressed but not surprised by Hammond's accurate assessment. He presented the frameworks he had developed. A phased transition that would maintain leadership continuity for Guardian's corporate implementations while establishing the foundation for broader applications. Hammond listened attentively, occasionally asking incisive questions that demonstrated his grasp of both the technical and organizational implications. When Darren concluded his presentation, Hammond was silent for a moment before responding. Most executives who decide to leave create carefully constructed narratives about new challenges or personal priorities that mask the actual motivations, he observed. Your approach is refreshingly transparent. You've identified an application for Guardian that you believe matters more fundamentally than quarterly growth metrics or market position. Yes, Darren confirmed simply. And you've developed a transition framework that protects Helix's interests while enabling this new direction. Hammond nodded appreciatively. It's the same strategic thoroughness you've applied to every challenge since joining us through the Meridian acquisition. He rose and moved to the window, looking out at the city skyline before turning back to Darren. I won't pretend I'm not disappointed to potentially lose an executive of your caliber from our leadership team, but I respect both your reasoning and your approach to managing the transition. Thank you, Darren replied. The board will need to review the specifics, of course, Hammond continued. But you have my preliminary support for the framework you've outlined. Work with HR to develop the formal transition plan, and we'll proceed deliberately over the time frame you've proposed. As Darren left Hammond's office, he felt an unexpected sense of lightness. The conversation had gone precisely as his strategic assessment had projected, yet the reality of initiating this transition created a clarity that analysis alone couldn't provide. The path forward was taking definitive shape. Over the following months, Darren executed the transition with characteristic precision. He worked closely with Hammond to identify and prepare his successor as Executive VP of Security Solutions, selecting Julia Kwan, his most promising division leader who combined technical expertise with strategic vision. The knowledge transfer was comprehensive, ensuring continuity for the corporate implementation of Guardian, while Darren began establishing the foundation for its broader applications. Lenora Washington formalized her offer to have Darren lead the technical division of her foundation, now officially named Sentinel Shield. The role would allow him to adapt Guardian's architecture for protecting vulnerable infrastructure while maintaining sufficient connection to Helix to ensure ongoing technological alignment. The compensation was significant by nonprofit standards, though modest compared to his corporate package, a consideration rendered irrelevant by his existing financial security. Miles Ramirez, true to his word, designed a hybrid role that maintained his position at Helix while establishing formal collaboration channels with Sentinel Shield. This arrangement provided the foundation with access to enterprise-level resources while preserving Miles's career trajectory. 6 months after his conversation with Hammond, Darren officially transitioned to his new role. The corporate announcement emphasized the strategic partnership between Helix and Sentinel Shield, positioning the move as an expansion of Guardian's reach rather than Darren's departure from the corporate structure. Industry publications noted the unusual career shift, but generally portrayed it as visionary rather than retreating, an executive at his peak choosing impact over further corporate ascension. As Darren settled into his new office at Sentinel Shield, more modest than his Helix accommodation, but with similarly impressive views of the city, he found himself reflecting on the journey that had led to this point. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy his professional and personal life had instead catalyzed a transformation far beyond what he could have anticipated in those initial dark days of discovery. Wade and Valerie had dismissed him as pathetic and manipulable, unaware that their betrayal would awaken capabilities that would not only ensure their downfall, but propel Darren to heights neither of them had imagined possible. Yet the ultimate outcome had transcended mere revenge or vindication. It had led to a fundamental recalibration of how Darren defined success and purpose, from external validation to self-determined impact. His phone buzzed with a text from Miles. Office set up? First day going well? Darren smiled slightly as he responded. New chess game. Different rules. Better purpose. The reply came quickly. Some opponents worth defeating aren't people. Looking forward to this campaign. Darren set down his phone and turned to the city skyline. The challenges ahead would be substantial. Adapting enterprise security architecture for resource-constrained environments. Navigating the complex intersection of technology and social impact. Building new teams with different motivations than corporate advancement. But for the first time since the night he had discovered Valerie's car at Wade's beach house, Darren felt a sense of purpose that transcended reaction or vindication. He wasn't fighting against betrayal anymore. He was building toward protection, not proving others wrong about him, but proving himself right about what mattered most. Chapter 8: Reconstruction. The headquarters of Sentinel Shield occupied 3 floors of a renovated factory building in Brooklyn, a deliberate departure from the gleaming Manhattan skyscrapers that housed Helix Global and other corporate giants. The space reflected Lenora Washington's vision for the foundation: innovative but accessible, professional without ostentation, technologically advanced while maintaining human scale. Darren's first 6 months as technical director were a study in contrast with his previous role, where Helix had offered virtually unlimited resources governed by strict quarterly performance expectations. Sentinel Shield operated with more modest funding but greater flexibility in timelines and applications. Corporate objectives had been clear and quantifiable: market share, revenue growth, profitability. Foundation success metrics were more nuanced: implementation reach, vulnerability reduction, incident prevention in under-resourced environments. Most striking was the difference in team composition. His Helix division had been staffed with highly credentialed specialists from elite universities and leading technology firms, motivated by career advancement and compensation packages. Sentinel Shield attracted a more diverse group: brilliant security architects who had grown disillusioned with corporate priorities, idealistic young programmers passionate about social impact, experienced systems engineers seeking meaningful applications for their expertise. Integrating these varied motivations and working styles into a cohesive team presented leadership challenges unlike any Darren had faced in corporate environments. The strategic brilliance that had made him formidable at Meridian and Helix required adaptation for this new context: less hierarchical, more collaborative, focused on inspiration rather than authority. "You're used to chess," Lenora observed during one of their weekly strategy sessions. "Moving pieces with clear functions according to established rules. This is more like gardening, creating conditions for growth without controlling every element of the process." Darren acknowledged the accuracy of her assessment. "The transition has been educational, but you're adapting more quickly than I anticipated," Lenora noted with approval. "The team responds to your strategic clarity while appreciating your willingness to incorporate their perspectives. It's an unusual combination. Effective leadership requires understanding the specific environment," Darren replied. "What worked at Helix wouldn't be appropriate here." This adaptability extended to his broader approach to Sentinel Shield's mission. The initial concept had been relatively straightforward: modifying Guardian's security architecture for implementation in resource-constrained environments like public hospitals, schools, and municipal systems. But as Darren immersed himself in the actual needs of these institutions, he recognized that technological solutions alone were insufficient. The most sophisticated security architecture was only as effective as the human systems supporting it. Many vulnerable organizations lacked not just financial resources for enterprise security, but also the technical expertise to maintain and respond to protection systems. Implementation without ongoing support and training would create false security rather than genuine protection. This realization prompted Darren to expand his initial vision, developing what he termed the Shield ecosystem, a comprehensive approach that included technology implementation, staff training, ongoing support structures, and community security networks. Organizations receiving Sentinel Shield protection would become part of a collaborative system, sharing threat intelligence and response strategies while receiving continuous technical assistance. The approach required significantly more resources than originally projected, leading to Darren's first major strategic challenge in his new role. 6 months into implementation, with pilot programs demonstrating promising results but funding constraints limiting expansion, he requested a private meeting with Lenora to discuss sustainable scaling. "The current model works," he explained, presenting detailed performance metrics from the initial hospital and school implementations. "But it's resource-intensive per organization. At current funding levels, We'll reach approximately 60 institutions annually, a fraction of the vulnerable infrastructure that needs protection. Lenora studied the projection models. What alternatives have you identified? 3 pathways, Darren replied, displaying the strategic frameworks he had developed. First, concentrate resources on critical infrastructure like hospitals and emergency services, accepting limited reach in education and municipal systems. Second, create a tiered implementation approach with comprehensive protection for the most vulnerable while offering partial solutions to broader organizations. Or third, he hesitated slightly before continuing. Establish a corporate partnership program that leverages private sector resources to expand our reach while maintaining our core mission integrity. Lenora raised an eyebrow at the third option. You're suggesting bringing corporate entities into a foundation specifically created to operate independently from profit-driven priorities. Strategic partnerships, not corporate control, Darren clarified. Companies with significant security resources could adopt vulnerable organizations in their communities, providing financial and technical support while Sentinel Shield maintains implementation oversight and quality standards. He outlined the framework in detail, a carefully structured program that would enable expanded reach while establishing clear boundaries between corporate contributions and foundation independence. The model included strict ethical guidelines, transparency requirements, and implementation standards that participating companies would be required to meet. It's a delicate balance, Lenora acknowledged after reviewing the proposal. Corporate resources without corporate control. But if anyone could design a system maintaining that distinction, it's you. She smiled slightly. Your entire career has been about understanding how to operate effectively within complex power structures while maintaining your own strategic objectives. The observation was more insightful than Lenora likely realized. Darren's experiences with Wade Preston and the subsequent corporate chess games had indeed developed his capacity to navigate systems with competing interests and agendas. The skills that had enabled his survival and triumph during those conflicts were now being repurposed for collaborative protection rather than competitive advantage. With Lenora's approval, Darren began implementing the corporate partnership program, starting with targeted outreach to companies with established corporate social responsibility initiatives and significant technology resources. The response exceeded even his optimistic projections, with major firms eager to associate their brands with tangible community protection rather than abstract charitable giving. Helix Global, predictably, was among the first to commit substantial resources, with Jeffrey Hammond personally approving an expanded partnership that included both financial support and technical personnel exchanges. More surprising was the participation of several firms traditionally focused exclusively on profit maximization, their leadership recognizing the strategic advantages of demonstrating social responsibility in an increasingly values-driven marketplace. 9 months into his tenure at Sentinel Shield, Darren received an invitation that represented both personal and professional significance. Leonard Preston requested a meeting at his Manhattan residence. The Preston family's financial situation had stabilized following the earlier difficulties, though their influence remained diminished compared to their former prominence. Leonard had officially retired from active business leadership, appointing his daughter Catherine to manage the family's remaining holdings. Darren accepted the invitation with measured curiosity. His interaction with Leonard since their confrontation at the downtown club had been minimal, occasional acknowledgments at industry events, but no substantive communication. What purpose could this meeting serve now, years after their corporate conflict had concluded? Leonard's residence occupied the top floor of a classic Upper East Side building, the interior reflecting old money aesthetics. Antique furniture, oil paintings of stern ancestors, leather-bound books lining mahogany shelves. At 75, Leonard himself seemed physically diminished, but mentally undiminished, his observations still incisive as he welcomed Darren. Your foundation work has generated significant attention, Leonard noted after they were seated in his study, dispensing with preliminary small talk. Quite a departure from the corporate trajectory most anticipated for you. Different application of the same core principles, Darren replied neutrally. Indeed, Leonard agreed. strategic implementation of technology resources to achieve specific objectives, though the beneficiaries differ substantially from typical corporate deployments. He studied Darren thoughtfully. What prompted this particular direction, if I may ask? It seems an unusual choice for someone with your capabilities and market position. The question seemed genuinely curious rather than confrontational, prompting Darren to respond with equal sincerity. Recognition that security technology is increasingly concentrated in entities with substantial resources, while vulnerabilities are exploited primarily in organizations without such protection. The imbalance creates systemic risk beyond individual institutions. Leonard nodded, apparently satisfied with the explanation. In your corporate partnership program, a pragmatic approach to resource constraints. Yes, Darren confirmed, increasingly curious about the purpose behind these questions. Leverage exists in all systems. The key is identifying and applying it towards specific objectives rather than allowing it to operate unchecked. A slight smile crossed Leonard's face. A philosophy we might share, despite our different applications. He rose and moved to his desk, retrieving a folder that he handed to Darren. The reason for my invitation. The Preston Foundation would like to become a significant funding partner for Sentinel Shield, with specific focus on rural healthcare infrastructure protection. Darren opened the folder, reviewing the detailed proposal with measured surprise. The commitment was substantial, enough to fund comprehensive implementation for over 30 rural hospitals serving economically disadvantaged communities. The terms were straightforward, with none of the control provisions that typically accompanied Preston family investments. This is unexpected, Darren acknowledged, closing the folder. Perhaps, Leonard conceded, though not entirely logical. The Preston family has traditionally invested in healthcare infrastructure, particularly in rural communities where manufacturing operations were historically based. This represents a continuation of that commitment, updated for current technological realities. The explanation was reasonable but incomplete. Both men recognized the symbolic significance beyond the practical investment. Leonard Preston offering substantial resources to a foundation led by the man who had outmaneuvered his son and contributed to their family's reduced corporate standing. May I ask about the timing? Darren inquired carefully. Leonard's expression shifted subtly, revealing a more personal dimension beneath the businesslike exterior. Age provides perspective, Mr. Blackwood. Family legacy becomes increasingly important as one's own time grows shorter. He paused before continuing more directly. Wade's actions, and my subsequent attempts to protect him from consequences, were misguided. The Preston name should be associated with more substantive contributions than corporate maneuvering or retribution. He gestured toward the folder. Catherine, my daughter, will manage our family's involvement going forward. She has different priorities than her brother or myself at equivalent stages. Building rather than dominating. Protection rather than acquisition. The meeting concluded with formal agreement to proceed with legal review of the partnership terms. As Darren prepared to leave, Leonard offered a final observation. You could have destroyed Wade completely, you know. The evidence you compiled would have supported criminal charges beyond the corporate misconduct that ended his Meridian career. Yet you limited your response to professional consequences rather than personal destruction. It wasn't necessary, Darren replied simply. Professional accountability was sufficient. Leonard nodded slowly. Restraint in victory. A rare quality. He extended his hand. I look forward to our foundation's collaboration. As Darren left the Preston residence, he reflected on the unexpected development. The proposed partnership offered significant practical benefits for Sentinel Shield's mission, potentially protecting vulnerable healthcare facilities serving thousands of patients. Beyond the tangible impact, it represented a resolution to the Preston chapter that transcended mere victory or vindication. Transformation of former adversaries into allies toward a common purpose. The Preston Foundation partnership accelerated Sentinel Shield's expansion beyond initial projections. By the end of Darren's first year as technical director, the protection ecosystem had been implemented in over 100 vulnerable organizations nationwide, with documented security improvements that prevented several potentially devastating breaches. Professional recognition followed, with industry publications noting Sentinel Shield's innovative approach to security democratization. Darren found himself increasingly invited to speak at conferences and policy forums, addressing the growing security divide between resource-rich and resource-constrained organizations. Yet despite this external validation, his most meaningful accomplishment remained the practical protection now extending to institutions serving vulnerable populations. When a coordinated ransomware attack targeted healthcare facilities nationwide, all 17 hospitals within the Shield ecosystem maintained operational continuity, while dozens of unprotected institutions faced system failures that compromised patient care. This tangible impact reinforced Darren's conviction that his professional redirection had been the right choice. The strategic capabilities that had enabled his corporate ascension were now serving a purpose that transcended quarterly reports or market positioning, creating systems that protected those most vulnerable to increasingly sophisticated technological threats. 1 year after joining Sentinel Shield, Darren hosted a small gathering at his apartment to mark the anniversary. The guest list was deliberately limited. Miles Ramirez, Lenora Washington, Bridget Navarro, who had semi-retired but maintained an advisory role with Lenora, and Julia Kwan, who had successfully transitioned into Darren's former position at Helix. As they enjoyed dinner on his terrace overlooking the city skyline, the conversation naturally turned to reflections on the Foundation's first year and the unusual career transitions that had brought them to their current roles. "I still remember the board's reaction when you announced your decision to leave," Julia noted, glancing at Darren. "Half of them thought you were having a midlife crisis. The other half suspected you were establishing a stealth subsidiary to eventually bring back into Helix." "And now?" Darren asked with mild curiosity. "Now they cite Helix's partnership with Sentinel Shield as evidence of our stakeholder-centric corporate vision in every investor presentation," Julia replied with an amused smile. "Success tends to validate unconventional decisions." "Success by what metric?" Lenora asked, the question seemingly casual but carrying deeper implications. "Corporate partnerships? Implementation numbers? Prevented incidents? All valid measurements," Darren acknowledged, but ultimately secondary to the core objective, reducing the security divide between those with resources and those without, creating protection equilibrium rather than concentration. Miles raised his glass in a casual toast. To protection equilibrium, a more worthwhile objective than quarterly growth targets. As the evening continued, Darren found himself observing his small circle of trusted colleagues with a sense of appreciation that transcended professional alliance. These were the people who had remained constant through his most significant transformations, from ambitious corporate director to revenge-focused strategist to purpose-driven security architect. Later, after the guests had departed, Darren stood alone on his terrace, considering the city spread before him. The same buildings that had once represented his corporate battlefield now appeared as an interconnected ecosystem. Hospitals serving patients regardless of resources, schools educating future generations, municipal systems supporting daily functioning for millions. The perspective shift reflected his own internal evolution. Where he had once seen primarily competition and hierarchies, he now recognized interdependencies and shared vulnerabilities. The strategic brilliance that had enabled his corporate ascension and subsequent revenge had transformed into something more constructive, designing systems that protected rather than dominated. As he turned to go inside, his phone buzzed with a notification. The Shield ecosystem had just prevented another attempted breach at a rural hospital in the Preston Foundation network. Protection functioning exactly as designed, invisible to the patients and healthcare providers who continued their essential work uninterrupted. Darren smiled slightly, experiencing a satisfaction deeper than any corporate victory had provided. This was the true replacement, not of his position or status, but of purpose itself. From professional survival to strategic revenge to something more enduring. Something that would outlast any individual career trajectory or personal vindication. Building shields rather than weapons. Creating protection rather than vulnerability. applying strategic brilliance to defend rather than defeat. The most meaningful victory of all. Chapter 9. Resolution. 3 years into Darren's leadership at Sentinel Shield, the Foundation's impact had expanded beyond initial projections. The protection ecosystem now encompassed over 400 vulnerable organizations nationwide, from rural hospitals to urban school districts to municipal infrastructure systems serving economically disadvantaged communities. More significantly, the model had been adopted internationally, with parallel implementations developing in Europe, Southeast Asia, and South America. What had begun as an adaptation of Guardian security architecture for non-corporate environments had evolved into a comprehensive framework for security democratization, a systematic approach to extending protection to organizations regardless of financial resources or technical capabilities. The Shield ecosystem combined technology implementation, ongoing support structures, training programs, and collaborative threat response networks into an integrated protection approach. The corporate partnership program had similarly expanded, with over 60 major companies now actively participating in protection sponsorship. The Preston Foundation remained among the most significant contributors, with Catherine Preston personally overseeing their rural healthcare security initiatives. The program had evolved from simple financial support to a structured engagement model where corporate security resources directly supported vulnerable organizations while maintaining adherence to Sentinel Shield's ethical frameworks and implementation standards. Darren's professional reputation had transformed accordingly. Once known primarily for his corporate strategic brilliance and meteoric rise at Meridian and Helix, he was now recognized as a pioneer in security equity, addressing the growing protection divide between resource-rich and resource-constrained organizations. Industry publications that had once tracked his executive career trajectory now analyzed his influence on security policy and infrastructure protection models. On a personal level, the transformation had been equally profound. The cold, calculating focus that had characterized his response to Wade and Valerie's betrayal had evolved into something more balanced. Strategic brilliance tempered by human consideration, systematic analysis directed toward protection rather than advantage. This evolution was evident in his leadership approach at Sentinel Shield, where the corporate Darren had been respected but somewhat feared for his ruthless effectiveness. Foundation colleagues described him as demanding but inspirational, maintaining exacting standards while communicating a sense of purpose that transcended mere professional advancement. "You've created something genuinely transformative," Lenora observed during their quarterly strategy review. Not just in security implementation, but in how protection itself is conceptualized. The Shield model is becoming the standard against which other approaches are measured. "The team deserves primary credit," Darren replied, characteristically redirecting personal recognition. "Their commitment to continuous improvement has driven our evolution beyond initial frameworks." "True," Lenora acknowledged, "but frameworks matter. Your strategic architecture provided the foundation for their innovations." She studied him with the perceptiveness that had made her such an effective CEO. "You seem more centered than when you first joined us, more aligned with purpose beyond achievement." Darren considered this assessment thoughtfully. The corporate environment rewards specific forms of strategic thinking, primarily competitive positioning and resource domination. Those skills have application beyond corporate contexts, but require recalibration toward different objectives. "Protection rather than competition," Lenora summarized with approval. Exactly. This recalibration extended beyond professional applications to Darren's personal perspective. The betrayal that had once defined his strategic focus had diminished in significance, becoming merely one chapter in a longer narrative rather than its defining element. Evidence of this evolution emerged unexpectedly during a cybersecurity conference in London, where Darren was delivering a keynote address on protection equity. During the subsequent reception, an all-too-familiar voice interrupted his conversation with European security officials. "Darren Blackwood, your foundation work has generated quite the reputation across the pond." Turning, Darren found himself face-to-face with Wade Preston for the first time in nearly 4 years. Wade had aged visibly, his once perfectly maintained appearance showing signs of strain, though he maintained the superficial confidence that had characterized his corporate persona. "Wade," Darren acknowledged calmly. "I wasn't aware you were attending this conference." Late addition to the speaker lineup, Wade replied with forced casualness. "Consulting on corporate security integration for mid-market firms. Not quite the headline slot, but respectable reentry after career adjustments." The awkward reference to his professional downfall hung between them momentarily before Wade continued. "Your sister Catherine speaks highly of your foundation collaboration. Quite the turn of events, considering our history. Your father initiated the partnership," Darren noted. "Catherine has been an excellent implementation partner, particularly for rural healthcare protection." Wade nodded, an uncomfortable silence developing before he spoke again, his tone shifting to something less practiced. "I've followed your work, the Shield ecosystem, impressive architecture, genuine innovation in distributed security protocols." The professional acknowledgement, surprisingly sincere, reflected the engineer Wade had been before ambition and entitlement had corrupted his approach. For a brief moment, Darren glimpsed the colleague Wade might have been under different circumstances, appreciative of technical excellence regardless of personal conflicts. "Thank you," Darren replied simply. "I was wrong." Wade continued, the admission clearly difficult for him. "Not just about you personally, though that assessment was catastrophically misguided, but about security architecture itself. Protection concentration creates systemic vulnerabilities regardless of individual implementation quality." It was perhaps the closest Wade Preston would ever come to genuine apology, acknowledging his fundamental misjudgment of both Darren's capabilities and security principles themselves. The admission wasn't motivated by remorse so much as professional recognition. Wade the engineer finally acknowledging what Wade the ambitious executive had refused to see. "Your current consulting work?" Darren inquired, deliberately shifting the conversation away from personal history. "Is it addressing protection standardization for resource variable environments?" Wade seemed momentarily surprised by the professional courtesy implied in the question, attempting to, though with limited client receptivity. "Mid-market firms want enterprise-level security at fractional cost without implementation complexity. We've developed some frameworks that might be relevant," Darren offered, surprising himself with a genuine collaboration overture. "Miles Ramirez could share applicable protocols if you're interested. No foundation affiliation required for implementation." The offer, professional respect without personal reconciliation, seemed to momentarily disarm Wade's carefully maintained facade. "I would appreciate that," he replied with uncharacteristic humility. Miles always understood implementation challenges better than most security theorists. As their brief interaction concluded and Wade moved to other conversations, Darren recognized something significant in his own response. He had engaged with Wade not as the man who had betrayed him professionally and personally, but simply as another security professional working in adjacent spaces. The interaction had been neither vengeful nor friendly, merely functional, focused on shared technical understanding rather than personal history. Later that evening, as Darren described the encounter to Miles via video call, his friend observed the underlying significance. "You didn't feel anything, did you?" Miles noted perceptively. No anger, no satisfaction in his diminished position, not even the need to demonstrate your superior success. "No," Darren confirmed, somewhat surprised by the realization himself. "It was like encountering a former colleague from a position I left long ago. Professionally relevant, but personally disconnected. Complete emotional decoupling," Miles observed with approval. The final stage of genuine resolution. The observation was accurate. Where Darren had once channeled cold, focused rage into strategic revenge, he now felt neither anger nor vindication regarding Wade Preston. The betrayal that had once defined his strategic focus had been fully processed and integrated, transformed from driving motivation into historical context. This emotional resolution extended to Valerie as well, though through different circumstances. Several months after the London conference, Darren received an unexpected email from his former wife. Her European marriage had ended, and she had returned to the States, establishing herself as a marketing consultant for luxury brands. The message was brief and carefully worded, acknowledging past wrongs without seeking reconciliation, simply offering closure if Darren felt any remained necessary. His response was equally measured, acknowledgement without recrimination, closure without renewed connection. The exchange was brief but significant, formally concluding a chapter that had informally ended years earlier. Like his interaction with Wade, it generated neither satisfaction nor resentment, merely a quiet recognition that those events now existed primarily as context for the transformative journey they had inadvertently initiated. This final resolution of past conflicts coincided with Sentinel Shield's most significant expansion yet, the establishment of global implementation protocols that would enable standardized security democratization across international boundaries. The initiative represented the culmination of Darren's strategic vision, transforming what had begun as an adaptation of corporate security for vulnerable domestic organizations into a comprehensive global framework for protection equity. The announcement event at Sentinel Shield headquarters attracted significant attention, with technology leaders, policymakers, and security experts gathering to discuss implications for global infrastructure protection. As Darren prepared for his presentation, he found himself reflecting on the complete arc of his professional journey, from ambitious corporate director to revenge-focused strategist to global security architect. Nervous? Miles asked, joining him in the preparation room before the presentation. Focused, Darren corrected with a slight smile. The global protocols represent our most comprehensive framework yet. Implementation challenges will be substantial, but the potential impact proportionally significant, Miles noted, from Project Phoenix to global security democratization in 5 years. Not the trajectory either of us anticipated when I showed you that surveillance photo of Valerie's car. The reference to their starting point prompted Darren to consider just how completely his life had transformed since that moment of devastating discovery. What had begun as personal and professional betrayal had catalyzed a journey of strategic brilliance, calculated revenge, and ultimately purposeful reconstruction. They fundamentally misunderstood what they were creating, Darren observed quietly. Wade and Valerie, their betrayal was designed to eliminate an obstacle to their ambitions. Instead, it created something entirely different than what any of us anticipated. As he moved toward the presentation stage, Darren carried this awareness with him, the profound understanding that transformative journeys rarely follow anticipated pathways. The greatest strategic insight wasn't predicting specific outcomes, but recognizing emerging possibilities within changing circumstances. The audience that greeted him represented the culmination of this particular transformation. Global technology leaders gathering not for corporate advantage, but for protection equity. People who recognized that security concentrated in resources-rich environments, while vulnerability remained in resource-constrained ones, created systemic risk for all interconnected systems. The Shield ecosystem began with a simple premise, Darren began, addressing the assembled leaders. Protection should not be determined solely by resource availability. Security technology concentrated exclusively in entities with substantial financial and technical capabilities creates vulnerability concentration in those without such resources, a systemic imbalance that ultimately threatens all connected infrastructure. As he outlined the global implementation protocols, Darren recognized that his strategic brilliance had found its most meaningful application, not in corporate ascension or calculated revenge, but in designing systems that extended protection to those most vulnerable to emerging threats. The black king chess piece Leonard Preston had sent him years earlier still sat on his office shelf, a reminder of a game conclusively won. But beside it now stood a model of the Shield ecosystem architecture, representing a different kind of victory. Not defeating opponents, but protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Not concentration of power, but distribution of security. The true replacement wasn't of position or status, but of purpose itself. From ambition to revenge to protection. From isolated success to systemic security. From strategic dominance to strategic distribution. In the end, Wade and Valerie's betrayal hadn't diminished Darren Blackwood. It had ultimately liberated him. Their attempt to replace him had instead catalyzed his own replacement of limiting paradigms with more meaningful purpose. Their underestimation of his capabilities had created the very conditions for his most significant transformation. As Darren concluded his presentation to enthusiastic response, he felt neither triumph nor vindication, simply the quiet satisfaction of purposeful creation. The journey that had begun with betrayal had culminated in something far more significant than revenge or restoration. It had led to reconstruction, not just of career or reputation, but of purpose itself. Not replacing an executive with another, but replacing limitation with possibility. Not calculating strategic revenge, but creating strategic protection. The most meaningful replacement of all. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on